Good afternoon and welcome to the August 16th, 2021 Design Review Meeting. The Design Review Committee is the subcommittee of Historic Zoning Commission. The meeting is informal and designed to guide applicants through the process of obtaining a certificate of appropriateness or COA for projects within the city's historic districts in light of the Historic District Design Guidelines. Applicant participation in DRC meetings is voluntary but highly recommended. Changes made or suggestions taken by the applicant based on the discussions with the DRC are the applicant's choice, but the DRC makes no representation as to whether any changes or suggestions made during the meeting will be approved by the voting body, which is the Historic Zoning Commission. There are 5 items on this afternoon's agenda. Item 2 was pulled by the applicant. When your item is called, please introduce yourself and generally describe your item in about 5 minutes. Speak either from the podium or the table to my right of the podium. Please focus on the specific points of your project that you want DRC to discuss. Now, Amanda, announcements?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to announce that we will be hosting a special design review committee meeting on October the 4th at 4 o'clock for the new City Hall master planning. And the meeting will be specific to discussing with the DRC the preliminary master plan, which we will have released in September. So it'll be an in-person meeting, and we hope that you can make it because it is a great opportunity to provide input on such an important project. This will be conceptual building form, massing, scale, and setbacks. So we'd like to get your feedback on that before moving forward with any more fleshed out plans. So we look forward to that, and I will send meeting invitations to all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, our first item is discussion of alterations, entrances, windows, awnings at 236 2nd Avenue South. Lines Incorporated is the applicant. This was item deferred from last week's Historic Zoning Commission meeting.
Yes, thank you for that. We do have the architect here from Lines Inc., who is, we're happy to show the plans. If you want to come up to the table here, you're more than welcome to sit at the table and use the microphone, or you can stand at the podium, whichever you prefer. I did include in your information that the applicant's submittal from the last Historic Zoning Commission meeting, and I also added some context photos that could help kind of frame the discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. Thank you for allowing us to be here. It's the first time that I've had the opportunity to present to you guys. So, and being the first one, I'm not getting an opportunity to see how the process is. So, hope we do this right. What we've got is a residential historic building. As I'm studying this and researching it, per your guidelines, you have a residential and a non-residential classifications. And as I read that, it tells me that any modifications to a structure that was designed for residential purposes should remain residential regardless of what's done on the inside. The struggle I have with this property is it's really non-conforming. I don't think it meets the guidelines of residential, and it doesn't necessarily meet the guidelines of non-residential as I look in your guidelines here. What's happened over time is you have an enclosed addition that doesn't meet your current guidelines because it's readily visible from all sides. It's very deep, it's very wide. And that's evident in these photos here. So when we begin to discuss modifications to that enclosed addition and the parameters that are in the guideline, it's difficult to meet because everything is visible on that building because it's non-conforming to start with. So the struggle we have is obviously the use is for a church. Ingress and egress is really important. Being able to get people into the building and out of the building quickly both serves for life safety and just proper form and flow, with inside the building. So I think I'm struggling with it a little bit because it's not, you call it non-residential, but, in an architectural professional world, I call it commercial or non-commercial, and this is very much a commercial application. And so what we're looking to, this committee is some help and some guidance on how to address the commercial, non-residential needs on a building that is, I assume, being classified as residential. So we can make it look a lot of different ways, but we need it to flow and function correctly as well, so.
Okay. Amanda, what's it zoned?
So the property is zoned to allow for the use that's proposed. And just to clarify a little bit, the Historic District Design Guidelines do provide guidance based on residential and non-residential form, not use. We do want to encourage adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is the way that most of our historic buildings are preserved and maintained in modern times. And so we definitely want to encourage that. What the guidelines intend to do, however, is to address different building forms and the appropriateness of types of alterations to buildings based on form. This was a residential building. The applicant's correct. It does have a rather large addition on the rear, and they're hoping to make some alterations to the non-historic addition on the rear. I did have the opportunity to speak to the building owner, Sean Clark, last week. He'd asked a number of questions, and I did want to clarify my comments from the Historic Zoning Commission meeting. The staff report that was prepared indicated that alterations are recommended to be lesser visible, of course, but alterations to non-historic elements or non-historic buildings are determined to be appropriate based on context of the building on which the element's situated or the street itself. And so it's not that alterations to this addition would not be supported in theory. It's more that the alterations would need to be more in keeping with the residential character and form of the historic building on which the addition's placed. So in my conversations with the building owner, I indicated that, adding doors and making some alterations to elevations that are visible can be supported by staff. It's more about how those are executed. And so I do think the conversation today is a little bit more about how to execute this intent in a way that would be more compatible with the building itself. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, my recommendations to staff would be to, if more egress is needed, these double doors are there. They'd like to add double doors here. I think that's fine based on the guidelines. Adding, garage door elements may not be as appropriate, but perhaps to add more flexibility with ingress and egress, adding additional French doors or doors that would allow for wider openings, more flexibility in getting people in and out would be more in keeping with the character and spirit of the building itself. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioners, comments?
So I guess one of the things that was confusing back when you were here in front of Historic Zoning is that the way the graphics are represented, it's not clear to me. For example, Ms. Rose mentioned garage door openings. Can you elaborate on where that is and what that would be like?
I think, I don't have control of the mouse, but it's there and two other locations, yep, there and there. And, you could make, if this were a residence, those could be actually a garage. I mean, if someone actually resided in that home, could there not be garage doors? I mean, that's.
Okay,
that
so
would be
it's
the question.
3 garage door openings?
4.
4, okay. And the purpose of those is, can you explain what's happening within the building?
It's ingress and egress.
Okay.
So you have, on the far left, you have auditorium space, you have a service in there, right? And so it's a lot of people coming in and out. More than probably would really want to go through a pair of doors, correct? So.
I can speak to it. Okay, the building owner. I can speak to it.
Oh, okay.
From a design standpoint, is this on? Can y'all hear me?
Put the,
I have a button here? Sorry. I can speak to it from the standpoint of a design standpoint. From a look, it would really look like windows. That's all we're desiring is 2 double doors on both sides with 4 windows there. That's what they would look like. So when I say garage doors, I think that's a little confusing. They would be glass garage doors with the white trim to match the building, the look, the feel. So the coming in and out is purely for a special event. If we were to have, I don't know, if it was a fall day and it was a beautiful day where it was 60 degrees and it's like, oh, we want to be indoor, outdoor and roll these doors up. That's how we would roll the doors up to allow that free flow feel and look. It's not from a standpoint of making them look like garage doors. They would look windows on both sides of those double doors.
I will just add that the information that was provided to staff is shown on the screen, and it doesn't appear to me to read like windows.
I feel like the character of that neighborhood, even though there is a mix of people living there and businesses, is residential forms. So other churches have survived without garage doors. You know, I just would not be able to support that. I think it calls attention to a too large addition that was approved before we had historic zoning. It used to be a printing facility back in the day, I can't remember the name of it, but it was a print. Do you remember Brian? Have you looked up that? Anyway, it was a printing facility, and before there were the computers and all. So I would not be able to support. I know what those doors look like, but I believe that when you look at that you're a neighbor to Clouston Hall and the other neighborhoods, and then just people still trying to live there, the idea of, for all kinds of reasons, I wouldn't support the garage door concept.
And
Are there any commissioners want to, Ken?
I just want to say, the solution that you presented is just not sympathetic to the context that it's in. That it's such a contrast to the surrounding area. And I think, I understand it's assembly function, you've got egress issues you've got to deal with, but I think if you could look at the context of the neighborhood that you're in to where it is more sympathetic, that would help. And I mean, I obviously can't and won't design it for you, but I mean, you know.
to add to that conversation is that Ms. Pierce mentioned the printing facility. Well, in the very beginning, that's first of all, that street is one of the oldest, some of the oldest homes in Franklin are on that street. And that home is a pre-Civil War home. At one time, a carriage maker lived there. And I believe he had his carriage making shop in the back. So, you know, it kind of has that history of some of that mixed use of having the business in the back. But as Ken said, there is so much contrast between a garage door that's kind of out of context to that neighborhood. And one thing Ms. Rose mentioned were French doors. Have you considered something like a French door in that place?
I mean, certainly can do French doors. We were thinking also, in addition to what Sean mentioned, was ability to bring in larger props, just mobility to be able to get in and out. And when you talk about the context, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what context you'd like me to look at, but when just right next to the track, I mean, there are furniture stores, there are other stores with overhead roll-up doors. I mean, it's a little bit industrial just right around that area. I mean, and then there's other context down the street further this direction where we are that is way more residential. So as you approach the tracks, it's way more industrial. So what you're looking at from that door is, if I should have a photo of that, you're looking at the side of an office building, basically, that it might be visible.
I
So,
understand.
yeah.
I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying. But I know of nothing in that area that has that particular appearance of that type of an industrial garage door.
Okay.
And the industrial, it was, I mean, it was where the old Lily Mills was, but that was on another street. You know, you're in the original grid of Franklin.
It is a very unique street in that there is office and residential and some other uses, and we want to be mindful of that, and I think flexibility and use is very important. I do want to note that we did have an application for a building, I believe it's 2 down on this very same street, that had asked for an overhead garage door in a highly visible elevation, and it was recommended to have that flexibility of being able to get larger items in and out. That was the whole intent for the other applicant as well, but to do it in a way that reads as more of a residential framed door, that, you know, if they're French doors, you can open them both at the same time, get big items in and out, and it's sympathetic to that residential character and spirit of the street. So, I
And the
mean,
garage-
I reiterate, we really want to be able to accommodate those code requirements, and we intend to. We also want to accommodate fenestration desires, but it needs to be in keeping with the character and rhythm and spacing of the openings that are currently on the building, per guidelines.
Okay, are there any more comments about the garage doors?
I'd like to make one comment. You mentioned French doors and having flexibility of it. What about accordion French doors that would, you know, fold back on each other, so it would give you that openness, but again, trying to give it a little bit more of a historical look, in keeping with that. Do we have a drawing elevation of that?
Just the rendering.
So it might be nice to see an elevation with a couple of options of the French door look, or the window look. You know, rolling up is one thing, it reads as industrial, but these accordion doors are quite handsome and could read more residential.
And I think the brand that's most common is the Nana Wall. If you've seen it, you can get it in all kinds of configurations that are
What's it called?
Nana
Nana.
Wall.
No, it's just 3 times the cost, that's all.
All right, any more conversation about the garage doors? Let's go on to the awnings, if not.
So the recommendation from staff from the last meeting was that the awnings really need to be more reflective of residential character. We do have a number of awning guidelines for residential form that is more of a canvas material that's more sympathetic to the residential form. Awnings are typically placed over the openings they serve and not wider than that. So in this case, there's 3 different bays that are separated by brick, and the recommendation would be a single awning would be over each one. Now, if the commission wants to approve something otherwise, it would be recommended that it be a non-metal, non-industrial flat awning per guidelines. Oh, and I did want to add that to Ms. Worthington's point that with the application to historic zoning, it would be very much advantageous for the applicant to submit elevations and not just renderings, because then we can have the dimensional qualities called out, so it's more clear for any sort of approvals and permitting. Thank you.
Amanda, assuming we can find some doors acceptable in lieu of the garage doors, can the awning span the whole distance on each end, both the double door fronts as well as those larger openings?
It is not the recommendation of the guidelines that that be the case, and so staff will recommend what the guidelines state, but it is up to the commission to make that determination.
Okay.
So I do believe
I-
that the configuration of the fenestration, the rhythm and spacing and material appearance of the doors probably is more important on this building than, you know, where the awnings land.
All right.
Mr. Chair, if it were standing seam and read like a porch roof, I think that could be an option.
Yeah. Any other comments on that?
The only other thing I wanted to say, there are plenty of commercial properties in the historic district that this body has ruled on that is considered appropriate, that maybe you could draw inspiration from.
Again, that's where I struggled, because it's not in the guidelines. I mean, the guidelines are residential and non-residential, and so I, you know, this kind of applies to residential, but it kind of doesn't. I mean, to put awnings in front of this now, canvas awnings, those things, the bottom of those will be down about 6 foot high. I mean, they're really low, and
But,
You know, so-
but I think you just heard, there maybe is an option other than what you proposed, but Ms. Pierce just stated
Okay.
something. And I think, this is a blend, we understand that, but we're trying to get something that fits the context of this particular area of Second Avenue, the neighborhood that we're in. And that's what we're trying to help you with.
And it's an adaptive reuse, for sure. But you try to do something that is softer and more in keeping.
This is what's currently there as like a overhead covering for weather.
Which could stay.
This is absolutely appropriate to a residential form, and if the applicant wanted to recommend or request an application to widen this configuration or work with, or to remove this and add some sort of configuration that's similar in residential, scope, then I do believe that could be supported by staff as well.
Okay? How
Can I
about
have a
the,
clarification?
excuse me.
Is that, like a fixed, it's hard, it's like a porch?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think we had any conversation about the double doors. Is anybody, any conversation on, not the garage doors, the double doors in the middle?
Staff can just comment that right now, these are the existing conditions. So there is the existing historic building, then there is a brick component, and then further down, it's more of a sided component to break that massing up. On the brick component, there is like a single bay, stoop kind of porch covering, and then further down on the back end of the additions, this wider one. The applicant's asking to add an extra door here, and that's able to be supported by staff.
Amanda, where's the extra door?
Underneath
left.
this single bay here.
And it would be under the stoop cover?
The stoop cover is proposed to be removed currently based on the application that was submitted.
So that would still be the ingress, but just a double door?
Yes,
Amanda, why don't you put up that floor plan
sure.
item, and then I think everybody can see what we're talking about.
So you can see that the plan is to add an additional door here, remove the covering from here, add flat metal awnings over this area, and then add garage doors on either side of the double doors.
And if I'm hearing correctly, what you guys are stating is come back with something that looks more in line with, present those windows, you gave the name, I'm not sure, on both sides.
That's
Use
just,
the existing
that's just
product.
one type.
Yeah, use the existing product that we have and just have the overhangs on both sides, which I think is doable with the double door there. It would work.
What you're proposing theoretically can be supported by staff. It's just more of framing it out to be more, of
Yeah.
a softer residential appearance.
Right.
And now I would like to talk about this. I
Yep.
was told that this rendering was inaccurate, but this is what was provided in the application. Can you clarify what the intent is here?
The only inaccuracy here is where that new door is shown. It's shown kind of on top of the brick and the painted brick that's next to it. It's actually entirely on the painted brick. So that's just a mistake on the rendering. So it's not affecting the historic part at all.
So this door with this window would all be on this area?
Yes, it just needs to slide over to the right a little
And then
bit.
you have these windows here? Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And then
So-
you're adding the two windows, right? The
yes, sir, we'll
Rectangular.
bring elevations when we resubmit, so
Yeah,
it'll be
that's
really
fine.
clear.
Thank you. To reiterate staff's comments from last week, alterations to the historic building would not be supported, but given that the applicant's proposing to put this all on the non-historic, it could be supported if it's in keeping with the rhythm and spacing of a residential form. Horizontal windows are not supported by our zoning ordinance, and so these would need to be windows that are actually in line with the types of punched windows that you see on a historic building here, that are, more vertically oriented with a grid pattern. If it's the intent of the applicant just to have light above it and be able to use this wall, then perhaps the windows are not the best location for that. Maybe it's better to have, some sort of a treatment on the inside to address that issue. Adding a door here is not as supported by the guidelines because it's less, more highly visible from the street. But again, because it's a non-historic portion, I do think it could be supported if the rhythm and spacing, the fenestration type is more residential, which would mean a door here, not a full width, door height window here, but a window that would be, following the spacing and location of this window that's already here on the building. But the window seal and header height. Thank you.
Are there any codes issues for having that egress? Is that more of an egress door? Is that
Yes.
a codes issue?
Yes, sir, it is.
Amanda? Right. Is it a codes issue, or who?
Is that an egress codes issue?
I'm not sure, but if they're saying it's required for egress, then I'm sure it is.
It doesn't serve any other purpose other than egress.
And we don't have a picture of it, but currently, if you look down the sight line of that side of there's another door back there as well. And it's just, what's that you do? Can't see it.
Without the trees, yeah. There's another one about halfway down.
Yeah.
It was in the floor plans.
This is the current condition here.
Hard to see.
So there is a door there
There's a window
already.
here.
Further down, there is a door. It's in the floor plans.
They'd like to convert this window to a door, I believe, and then add and take these windows out and add clear story windows. It would not be supported by staff as shown on the rendering.
The windows.
The windows.
Right.
Right.
Okay, any other comments about the windows or the doors on that right elevation?
Just to be as clear as we can with the applicant, the staff is going to recommend against the clear story windows, and I would not support those because I think it just draws attention to the addition.
You would,
Not support the clear story windows.
okay. Any other
And I don't know
comment?
how others feel, but
But staff would support
the door,
a different shaped window.
yes.
Isn't that what you
The
said?
windows that are proposed to take place of these windows. And so, if the clear story windows aren't there, then these windows would remain, which I would not ask them to change the current configuration. If they'd like to add more openings on this side, then we can certainly support more openings if they follow the rhythm and spacing of these existing windows. These existing windows are playing off the rhythm and spacing of the historic windows. Changing this window to a door is entirely appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
And my only comment, I would have to support staff on this.
All right, anything else? Amanda, you got anything else?
No, I do want to offer that I'm happy to meet with the applicant to talk over the proposal, the elevations, renderings, prior to an application being submitted. Feel free to contact me early and often, and I'm happy to give you feedback. I want you to be successful in your next meeting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on then. Item 2, as I mentioned earlier, was pulled by the applicant at this time, so we're ready for item 3, which is new construction at 173 Splendor Ridge. Chad Gore.
Good afternoon, friends.
Good afternoon.
I brought treats for the whole class at the beginning.
Thank
You
you.
might eat one. We are on number 11.
All right.
Lot 13. I will start by getting you oriented, though I think we might be pretty familiar with it by now. So, if you remember, we kind of started in the middle of the street, 9, 10, 11, worked our way to the west. Just this past week, you guys approved lot 3. Jumping back over to the west side now, so this is lot 13 as highlighted on that cover sheet. You will find, to begin with, the site plan. Next page again. This is a form that is most similar to lot 5, which has been a few meetings now, but I will just focus our discussion on what I know we talked about with lot 5, which was,
Thank you. Which was, Lot 5 was kind of a new form for us along the street. We wanted to introduce a new or a different version of how to orient the garage with the rest of the house. So we didn't have the same form repeating itself all the way down the street. And there was a lot of discussion about making sure that that garage felt, detached enough. So we've repeated the form here that was eventually approved on Lot 5. And it is really just a rebranding of that elevation as well. It's a colonial revival, and it's similar to what Lot 5 was, but with different kind of details. And of course, it'll be different brick. I think it's probably important to look at, go a couple more pages there, Amanda. This context, just showing where we have Lot 13 on one end and Lot 5 on the other. I'm personally not worried about the two sort of competing with each other at that distance, especially since they're kind of around the curve. Let's see. We are, as per usual with the lot coverage, just under 40%. And yeah, I guess I'll just let you guys see if you have any specific questions after that. One thing I did do here that we didn't do on Lot 5 is more of the main part of the house is brick. I thought that was an extra step in making sure that the garage felt like a separate element from the main house, quote-unquote main house. So you see more of that two-story house being brick than it was the last time we used this form.
Chad, on your, is that an attic or a third story? Will that area be used?
No, it's just attic.
Chad, what are the differences between this and the other lot that you've identified?
Let's see, probably best pointed out one by one on the front elevation. Sheet A4. On this version, we have a different gable treatment. We have a half-round window in the gable rather than a kind of rectangular louvered vent that was in the gable. We had brick soldier headers on the windows previously. Now we have a cast stone header. We had an arched opening into the front door, where now we kind of have a portico pediment treatment over the front door. On the atrium, if you want to call it that, on the right side, there were rectangular transoms. Now we have half-round transoms. There was a, I can't remember if it was shingled or metal, but there was a sloped roof on top of the, sunroom, and now we have the sort of balustrade. And we'll be using different brick.
And
I think the
balustrade up there is-
shutters are the same as they were before.
The balustrade above the sunroom is purely decorative, there's no access to
Yeah,
it.
we'll have a door out to it from the bedroom that's there.
Oh, you will?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure if these plans reflect that, but that's, if we haven't updated them yet, we plan to.
There is a window shown there.
Yeah, we'll be flipping bedroom 3 over to that side so that it has access to that porch. I'm sorry, I didn't get that in here.
Do any of the other houses at Splendor Ridge, do they have this element of the balustrade and the porch above there?
That, not in that, no, I think we have, well, none that are accessed, none that are on the front elevation that are accessed from inside the house. Yeah, we have some sloped roofs. We have one, I believe it's lot 11, that has a balustrade over the front door. Well, no, I must be thinking of an older version of it. So no, I think that's the only one.
And the arched window element is siding?
It'd be like flat trim all the way around all those
Gotcha.
windows, all painted, yeah.
So staff's comments would be specific to three things. The first comment would be about the lot coverage. Staff cannot support a lot coverage as recommended by the guidelines of anything over 35%. The second item would be the garage. I do agree with the applicant that the garage does appear to be more detached from the home than the last rendition on lot 5, namely, the roof shape and then also the materials do help differentiate it. However, I do believe that the intent of the guidelines is to have this appear to be physically detached more so than is shown here. The typical configuration that has been approved for this street has been more so a configuration where the garage is really fully behind the main form of the house, which would be recommended for a configuration of this type where the garage is technically attached, but from the street view, it does look detached. I do believe that the garage appears to be fully detached from the rendering that's provided today. Now, the other item would be specific to that balustrade. I do believe that the execution of this, colonial revival home is excellent. It's a very good proposal and it can be supported. However, having a porch that's accessible here would not be very typical of something we have in our historic district. I do think for having the balustrade there and it being purely decorative would be fine. Having the door on the side, however, is just not as typical to having a porch so close to the front elevation. Side porches have been common and framed in as such, but they're typically not so close to the front. So that is one thing I would note. Perhaps if this element was like under this window, it might feel a little bit more comfortable having a door there, but and more typical of what you would see historically, at least in this area. Thank you.
I guess I don't have a real issue with just making that a decorative porch, though it seems kind of like a waste. I wouldn't arm wrestle about it, but I'd like y'all to consider whether that's a worthy exception. I can't, and just to make sure we're clear about it, I don't have room to move it back. You just can't get a car in and out of the garage if you do that. But if it is the will of the group, then certainly we can make that a decorative porch instead of an occupied one. It's a strange rule to me. This is just about context as much as anything else?
Just from a practical standpoint, I don't know that I would want a porch coming off a bedroom like that or a room like that with the house next to me being that close.
Mhm.
I don't, but that's just me,
Yeah.
so.
Well, for what it's worth, we sell a lot of them that way. People like their
See, I'm
porches.
old, so
I'll tell you one thing that is nice, if you do have that porch there, is that from the street, it appears to be a window.
yeah.
And because you have the two windows, so for street level, it would appear to be a window.
Yeah, and I certainly would put a pair of shutters on it and have the same header treatment and that kind of thing, if it were to be a door.
And Mr. Lastard, I do think that really gets at the heart of my comment, that if that appears to be a window and not an actual door there, I do think that, execution-wise, it would be fenestration pattern that's typical. So with a, a header over it, and the shutters, I think I could support that.
Anything else from anybody?
Just to reiterate, the reason that we have approved that overage on the lot is because of how much open space there
Yes, good
is
point.
planned in this
And
development.
just say again, the percentage of open space.
Sure.
I think that's always good to,
Absolutely. Yeah, by the time if we supposed that we were to build each of these lots out at 40% coverage, if you added all that together, it would equal about 13% of the entire development, not including the street.
good. Okay, anything else from anyone?
Would you like me to continue to include that page in these submittals, just so it's clear for the record?
Yes,
Okay.
I think that's good.
I can do that.
All right, Chad, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me say, the only other comment I'd make for the style of this house might look a little bit simplification of the balustrade.
I think, and I don't know if you're looking at the elevation or at the rendering, but
At the rendering.
the rendering, just the way it does
Okay.
things, it might
Okay.
be making it look more complicated
Okay.
than it is.
Yeah, I
Thank
looked
you.
at the elevation to get more of an
Okay.
idea how it's detailed.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, we're ready for the next item, discussion of principal structure alterations to principal structure and alterations to accessory structures at 724 Fair Street.
So I'll briefly introduce everyone and let them introduce themselves as well. We do have some new owners of the property shown on the screen here, 724 Fair Street, which is a lovely historic home. So we have Kevin Coffey here, architect representing Jeff and Aaron, and I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. Susan, it's so nice to meet you all.
We're the owners.
Yes.
The parents.
Yes, and Aaron here at the table is the owner's son. He is a design professional himself. So I will turn it over to you guys and then make my comments. Be sure to hit your button if you haven't already. Okay, the green light
Green is
on.
good.
Yes.
Yes.
Good to see you, Kevin.
Oh, good to see you guys too.
Welcome,
Even
Mr.
though
Coffey.
you do look kind of like bank tellers back there, but it is good to see you.
Well, Kevin remembers before COVID, this was a casual meeting, but that's been fixed.
Yeah, it has. So unfortunately too, I brought 4 copies of something to augment, thinking you guys were able to share, but if we need it, we've got it here. But I think in general, what I'm going to do, probably you guys will approve of this, I'm actually going to let Aaron talk. So he has done a lot of the research. And so, this is one of everybody's favorite houses in Franklin. But as you know, it has been a bit neglected over the
Yeah.
years and can really use new owners like it has now. And their thrust obviously is to restore the house. And you'll also be glad to know that their big idea is to basically use the same footprint. So we are not really attempting to add footprint to the house. So that should simplify things greatly. So anyway, I'm going to let Aaron kind of go through a little bit of the history, and he's done a nice little presentation of kind of the history of the house. So.
Can you hear me? Oh, hi. My name's Aaron. I'm an interior designer. I work in New York City, and I have a degree in design, but really studied a lot of architecture and art history. So preservation is really a passion of mine, and really kind of making sure we kind of preserve things in the time frame that they were created, but also to make them adaptable to modern day living. So with that, that's kind of the intention, is to really bring Fair Street back to its origins as a late federal, leading into the Greek Revival and its expansion, which currently it was very stripped of in the early 20th century through a lot of architectural details as seen today. So we are proposing, I'm not sure if the proposed,
And I can kind of help you
Yeah,
along,
of
Erin.
course.
I don't want this to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I added some photos to the beginning just for
Great.
some context photos. So you can see this
Perfect.
is the front elevation, as you see right in front of the house. I kind of got an angled version, so you can see this side addition a little more clearly. I know there's this large magnolia tree there. I'm not sure if the intent is to maintain that or not.
yes.
It is?
yes.
Okay, great. You'd asked me about a tree removal. I didn't know if that was this one or not. Okay, great. And then you can see this addition more clearly from this photograph. And then here's a side angle, so you can see that a little better as well. So this lovely historic photograph. And I can just click through, just let me know when, and I'm happy to help any way I can.
Great. So this is from, I believe, the Franklin Historic Society. I found like a Flickr page of some sort that's kind of like a record of most of the things in the city. And this was, I believe, from the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, or early 80s, from what I could find out about it. And then I guess the next slide is kind of a proposed agenda of revisions. One of the most important things that I think, beyond just an aesthetic thing, is to really clean the brick and remortar it because it is in really poor condition. And then kind of to bring it back to that original red color that you would have seen on a home of its age. And then to go through doing a roof so that there's a consistent roof throughout the entire residence. Changing windows back to paned glass, which would have been a much more historically accurate form of a window on a home like this. These windows were clearly switched in the turn of the century to a wider pane glass. And then also then with that, changing the side lights on the current door back to paned mullions, because right now, as you can see, the top on the transom is original to probably its expansion in the 1850s, but the sides have been replaced to match the French doors, which were clearly added in the 20th century. And then with kind of the window argument, we'd like to add shutters to the residence, as we have actually found evidence in old photographs given by the previous owner that their house actually used to have shutters, given the condition of the brick. And then on the front door as well, we'd like to do historic paneled front doors and get rid of the French doors that exist as is. And then one of the biggest changes would be to make the porch more historically accurate. As I'm sure we all know, it used to have very thick columns on it, and I'm not sure exactly why. I assume due to rot, they were removed for these, and we'd like to really make the porch more historically accurate and proportional to the residence as it exists. And then
Let's just stop there really
Yeah.
quick, and I'll show this proposed concept, so you can kind of see what Erin's talking about here.
Yeah, so this is a concept drawing that I worked on while we started the process of talking about how we wanted the house to look, as well as what would be historically accurate for it. And I really worked on a lot of research and spent a lot of time researching historic homes throughout America, whether that was well-known architectural residences, and I also went through websites of real estate listings specifically focused in the South to really get an understanding of Southern antebellum architecture, the Southern Federal versus New England Federal, which is a very different vernacular. And we really worked on kind of creating a home that still felt very Southern, but accommodated the generations of additions and changes that the home has seen that would still remain architecturally accurate to it, but also just kind of giving it a much more attractive aesthetic appeal than it currently has. So this was kind of where we landed in terms of the adjustments to the residence to kind of make it feel more as a federal home as it's been indicated by the city of Franklin.
So let me go back here really quick. I'd like to talk about the house and then jump to the
course.
accessory structure. So do you think that would be helpful in terms of, compartmentalizing and understanding everything? So let's just stop right there, and then we can move on to the addition and then the other items. So do you have anything additional that you want to add?
No.
Okay. Jim, would you like me to speak?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I first want to thank the applicant. I know that, Jeff and Susan, as well as Aaron, have really, taken pride in this building and just want to bring it back to a state that it deserves. So I really do appreciate that. I've had a lot of conversations before the home was purchased to ensure that everyone understood, the parameters of it. It is in the floodplain, so there's some stipulations there that come into play. So it's not the easiest property to take on, but it's certainly a worthwhile one, and we're very excited about that. So, and Aaron clearly knows a lot about architecture and is really trying to be mindful of, this form versus this form, which came on at different times. What I would challenge the applicant and the committee here to think about today is how buildings grow and change over time. From a preservation theory standpoint, we have, rehabilitation of a structure, which would be to rehabilitate what's there and make changes to it to accommodate new uses, expanded uses. You also have a restoration theory, which would be to restore the building to a point in time. And I think what the applicant's seeking to do is kind of a combination of the two. Sometimes changes happen to buildings over time, and sometimes you want to revert those back. Sometimes it's important to keep those changes because they're historic in their own right. So I do think we want to kind of focus on this historic brick portion and think about how the building's evolved over time, if reverting some of these changes is really in the spirit of the guidelines, or just working with them and rolling with them might be the better treatment. I would like to talk more specifically about the windows, and then we could talk about the porch, because I do think the porch maybe is shown elevated or kind of reconstructed in a way, and I want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So as far as the windows go, I know I've worked with the previous owner on this building a little bit. I can say for certain that, yes, these columns rotted out. They replaced it with the columns that were there weren't the historically appropriate ones. And so I do think that the columns that are proposed are much more appropriate to the style of the building. The windows, however, I'd like to know a little bit more about when they were put in. Are they historic in their own right? Would replacing a historic window, even if the pattern's not the most appropriate to a federal style building, be better than replacing them with new windows? So just maybe if you and Kevin could comment a little bit about the windows, that'd be helpful.
I can comment about those. There's definitely been changes over the years with the windows, and I don't have doubts that the vintage of the original house and the first additions that were done in the 1800s, that pretty much every house I've worked on of this vintage has 9/9 windows on it. It just is what it is. And almost all of them had or still have shutters on them. There is some evidence that this at one time had shutters. I don't think we're going to find like that magic bullet picture from 1891 that shows them. But, I do think that it probably at one time had shutters. The porch has gone through several different configurations on the front, different widths. Originally my feeling, and I think Aaron's as well, is that this was a 3-bay federal with the offset asymmetric front entrance, which, the porch probably would have been a single bay porch on that right side. So we know that was changed at one point. We feel that in order for it to have had the shutters on the main level, that at some point the entire rack of the front porch was probably lowered, and I'm not exactly sure why that was. It may have even had a flat roof on it at one time, or a flatter, and that's so the shutters wouldn't have landed against the eave of the porch. The raising of the porch really has to do with allowing the shutters to operate. And I know there are examples where the shutter, the folk example where it just lands halfway on something, but I don't think we can really reinvent that history to go back and say like, oh, it's really cool if it lands up against something. When we redo it, we need to make that be able to operate. So those are kind of the assumptions. And really that picture right there, you can really tell where the 3-bay
Right.
federal style was. You'll also notice that there's an obvious asymmetry on the front of the house from the existing window locations. I would never try to reinvent that. That's one of those things that you really need to kind of keep where it is. So one thing that's kind of curious about the windows is I have not worked on one where there is kind of this wood frame built in from the brick that has that wide of a frame around it. And I feel like they may have been replaced one time instead of, having to connect it to the brick and the jambs, they may have built those in and made the windows slightly narrower than they were. That's an assumption. I may be totally wrong, but I have 2 other projects from a similar vintage right now, and they don't do that. The window frame, the brick mold is right up against the brick. So I did notice that these windows seem to be more narrow than a lot of 9/9 windows. They tend to have a little more squarish panes, and if you do them on this, they're kind of squished. So I do think those have been changed over the years as well.
So is the intent, Kevin, to replace the complete window, or is that rather than just panes in there?
The intent would be to replace the windows entirely with a historically accurate version of a window with panes that's kind of seen throughout Franklin. So you would have a wood-cased window with separate panels of glass in a 9/9 configuration, or some form of federal configuration, whether it's 6/6, 9/9, depending on the size of the window.
That's really helpful. Thank you for clarifying on that.
Okay.
To continue my comments on the windows, I did want to know more about, whether or not, how old these windows are. I'm not opposed at all to replacement if they're not historic windows. Sometimes changes occur over time, and the Secretary of Interior Standards would recommend, rolling with those changes over time. If these aren't historic, then I do think a more...
They are old,
They're old.
but they're not really historic.
Not
Like,
everything that's old is
By the time they were
historic.
done, they were, the very first day they were done, they were no longer historic, in my opinion, even though they're very old windows that are in there right now. The vintage of those, I have really no idea.
Yeah.
And I don't know,
Well, Kevin, to your point, so I know of an addition that was found in the late 1890s, and then later on, there was a door, and so they turned the door into a window. And it looks like, just like today, you bought standard-sized windows. And you went down to the place where they had the windows, and you bought ones that were the same size, and when you put them in, you built out to fit the window
Jam.
rather than the opening, and that's
Correct.
probably what you have
it
in that
looks
situation.
like that's the case. Now, that might have been completed in the late 1800s or the early 1900s.
I'm going to
but-
assume the early 1900s. on
Yeah,
this,
I would think so
Given the
too.
Sanborn maps.
And I also, the vintage of the addition on the right would have been a time, if they had done that they might have gone back and done some of these other alterations. The irony with that is they used the divided windows in that addition, but the windows on the main house then are back to 1/1, which is not typical of the time period at all.
Do you think that there are old windows on the addition?
I do. I seem to think those windows fit the addition, even though they're kind of the addition has some kind of craftsman feel to it with the awning. I hadn't really thought about that, Mary, but I do think they're original to the addition. Just like, I can't read someone's motives back then, but they may have thought that the 1/1 windows look weird there, so they.
Do we have one that really shows that upstairs window?
It's kind of hard because of the
No, okay.
tree.
But they're all 9/9.
9/9.
Yes. So getting back to the porch, this porch clearly was added over time. I agree with the architect's assessment that if anything, this was a single bay and it was expanded at some point over time. I would not recommend changing the configuration of the porch to accommodate shutters because, this porch has been there in this configuration for however amount of time. And I think that while federal homes could have shutters, they don't all have shutters, and I wouldn't agree with changing something that has been here for this long to accommodate shutters to be added to the windows. I don't think that's really in keeping with the spirit of the design guidelines.
Can I add, though, too, that I think the porch is in fairly poor condition, especially the ceiling of it, so I do know that, it's likely going to be reframed. Whether it's in that exact configuration or not is another question. You can tell by the sag, even on that picture. So I do think there's some reconstruction going on there. So, maybe we have the mindset of someone back in the 1900s adding on is like, well, now we're going to redo it, so let's make it kind of in our own image of what we think will fit at this point. So, I understand that we're caught between, are we keeping history, are we trying to reinvent it in some way, or are we just going with it? So we're juggling that a little bit. But
How much would the slope change? So you're proposing to take down the porch completely and rebuild?
I think that part of that's going to be exploratory when we get up in there and see what's going on. But if you walk up there, the ceiling is definitely in rough condition. It rolls, it's rotted through in places.
Right.
The assumption then is that there have been critters and everything else in there, and there's probably rotted wood
I can understand
in
that.
there. So when you build it, obviously, we're not going to rebuild it with camber and slope in it. We're going to rebuild it straight. So that's when, to me, I would take the opportunity then to just raise that a little bit to accomplish that.
And I do think that could be helpful if that's determined to be appropriate by the commission to remove this. I do think, addressing the slope could be appropriate. The one thing I would encourage the applicants to continue to explore is that, this is in the floodplain, so the amount of investment on the property is called, attributes to the substantial improvement value. Once you trigger more than 49% of that, then the whole property has to be elevated out of the floodplain. So we want to try to keep that in mind and make sure that we're being cognizant of that, especially in light of such considerations as the main house.
We're aware of the flood situation and potential changes to that and how that affects budgets and everything else. So I'm sure that will be a partial determinant in what we do. I would say too, Amanda, that, and maybe it's somewhat personal opinion, and I think Aaron might agree with me, is I think those columns are too slender.
Oh, yes,
what?
absolutely.
And
Or do what?
they're too slender.
Oh, yeah.
Proportionally. So to me, they ask to be replaced with a more appropriately sized column. And again, if we raise that up the several inches, we want to proportionally change the columns with it. And I
As
don't think.
recall, those columns we approved that 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes, it was
A
just simple
to those
repair.
Because they were in such bad shape.
Oh, no.
But the
I
columns
get
that
it.
were there were not appropriate.
Yeah,
They
that's
were-
right.
Right, it was just really they were rotted out and just replacing for stability purposes.
And I
So-
don't.
So I'm first of all, hit the floodplain, and then I come back to the porch.
Okay.
But on the floodplain, just to make you aware that January 1 of 2022, there's a change in the floodplain. Are you
We
aware
are
of that
aware.
with the ordinance, which will benefit you in your remodel?
We have heard, yes.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay, back to the porch. Originally, according to the 1878 map, this house probably had no porch
Right.
originally. So the porch has been added over time.
Correct.
All I can say, you know, for me, Gene Wagner is one of the first persons I met when I came to town in 1990. So, you know, I'd known Gene for a long time, and she was very active. In fact, she lived in that house with her family, as far as her family through her, you know, 80 some odd years. That's a long time. That's a generation.
Sure.
And, you know, I'm excited that we have a person who's purchased this property that has a great interest in it and wants to really let it shine like it should. From research I've done, it looks like George Iron built this house probably between 1824 and 1826 as far as the three-bay part of it.
Right.
And given that, it's the oldest house west of the downtown core in Franklin. This is a significant historic property, and I applaud you for what you want to do.
Thank you.
So it makes me sympathetic to the windows. It makes me sympathetic to the porch. And the question I wanted to ask on the porch, on the width that you're proposing, how is that different than the current width?
So we were just talking about that actually before we came over, because I had done a drawing. There was a symmetrical front porch, and you know, if you do the outside columns and basically center them on the window bays, that makes the right bay wider than the left bay, so it's no longer a perfectly symmetrical porch. So we had initially thought that the porch would be a bit more narrow, but it's a little bit in flux right now. So
Yeah, we're discussing at the moment. I also want to preface that this drawing I did is solely based off of looking at a photo of the house and drawing it with a T-square. It was not to scale at the time. I did not have any information on that. But as of the way that the porch currently exists, they did something quite, I would say, genius in the sense that they very slightly altered on every pillar off-center to what the porch does is it actually creates the symmetry on the front of the house, which is kind of like a trompe-l'oeil effect to creating this home, to making it look more like an accurate federal, even though it's very ad hoc with its windows. And what we would have to do in order to keep the width is we'd have one side of the porch probably be about 18 inches wider between the bay of columns.
Yeah, you notice that the right bay on that one is, when you really look at it, it's noticeably wider than the other two bays. But your mind plays tricks on you, and there's a balance thing going on there. I bring up Mount Vernon all the time. You know, how many of you think that Mount Vernon is symmetrical? And people, oh yeah, it's perfectly symmetrical. We'll go back and look at a picture. It's not at all. The overall effect is that it's symmetrical, balanced. So there's a little trick going on here with the odd configuration of the windows upstairs and the little bit wider bay. And you'll notice too, the door's not really perfectly centered on the columns either. So I think we're gonna still have some of that. I don't want to invent that because I can't, but if it's something that's already there, we can go with it.
So the real change that you're really talking about is the slope.
And just the height of the rack just slightly, so the shutters can fold back.
So that's to adjust to the shutters below, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So typically also, this has a pilaster that's back at the face of the main house. Sometimes they had them, sometimes they didn't. My experience is a lot of the time the porch rack just went back and landed into the wall, and there was not a pilaster there. Everybody's mind seems to think that there's always one there because it's holding something up. But there are a lot of these old houses where the shutter operates underneath the rack of the porch, and there's not really a pilaster. So we'll just have to see how that works out. There's probably evidence back there of it somehow, but that's not something that we saw. So I think our basic approach is to center those outside columns between the outer windows, so it makes sense, very similar to what's there now, but just do a little bit better proportion column and raise the rack just slightly so that the the shutters operate.
I also want to be very clear too. We're going to replicate the existing molding profile when it is raised. So nothing will be altered visually other than the pitch of the roof. We actually quite like, and it is very historically accurate, and it's it has a very kind of Greek revival molding application. So I think the application is very good for the house. We just want to raise it up and then obviously give it a more functional gutter system, because the current gutter system is actually what has caused the complete rot of the porch, because the water cannot escape it properly. So that'll also be taken into consideration.
Thank you. I think that was, between the two of you, that was really helpful in me understanding the intent behind the porch. One thing I'd like to comment on now, or get more information on now, is the conceptual drawing does show a window being added. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh,
No,
it
it's
actually,
just off-center.
yeah, I think it's more or less just the kind of the eyeballing it when drawing it, but I think we don't have any intention of adding any window.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, there's still 5
Yeah.
bays, basically.
I see. Okay, so the drawing was just more of,
So the streaks are just water stains on
Okay,
the
that-
brick?
I think so.
Yeah, I think
The house had been painted, that kind of, you know, that red brick color that you often will paint a historic house. It is set in such kind of a choppy state that we really would like to clean the brick to its original. And there's also, I've discovered through inspecting, that some of the repairs were done with a red colored Portland cement, which we will have removed because it's also very harmful to the brick.
Right.
We really want to make sure that the actual brick is well maintained on the house.
And that vertical line, isn't that kind of where the second addition was put on?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're really seeing there, is that where
Yeah.
the separation.
Right. And I did inform the applicant that, cleaning the brick is something they can go ahead and start doing. It's not something that the commission, they need to wait on the commission on. It's definitely appropriate and well in keeping with,
I have another question
guidelines.
regarding your windows, and this is to your side lights. So I know currently they have the solid panes for the side light, and you're proposing kind of there's these square panes and then true divided light. And I wonder, have you seen examples of that, around in this area?
Yes, I believe both Federals on Bridge Street, 328 and 402, both have pane side lights on either side of their doors.
Well, I'm referring like to where they're square with the muntins in between.
Oh, I would have them proportionally match to the ones on the transom. So they would look as if they'd always been there, because I believe the transom is original to, my assumption, and I don't know this because I don't have, but based off of its aesthetic, I assume that door was actually added when the Wall family owned it sometime in the 1850s, just because of its width and the overall aesthetic appearance of it. It's very linear. It doesn't have a fan light like a lot of the other Federals, but I could be wrong in that assumption. But you would have had, again, paned glass on the side lights at the time period of the addition of the door.
And I'm sure you've looked at the house on Third Avenue North, they call the Peggy Eaton House.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, just wanted to point that one out too, because it probably, as far as size, was similar to that.
Yep.
And the Marshall House.
And the Marshall House, that's right.
On the windows, I have to wonder if the frames are so heavy, if these weren't early retrofit windows and the original frames are behind there.
That's a good question.
I think they would be. A couple of the other houses from this vintage that I've worked on, the windows are almost a freak of nature that they're actually still in there because it's a double or triple Wythe brick exterior wall, and they would go in and they would basically shove pieces of wood in between the Wythes and then attach them there, and you're just amazed that they've been there for 100-something years.
These
with
appear to be
operation.
almost flush with the face of the brick.
They are pretty close to being flush. So that's one of the other reasons why I felt like a typical brick mold, even if it's expanded, sits back from the brick to cover the gap. And these, it's like they've added something over the top of them. But, unless we knocked one of them out of there and looked, I don't know how we would know that for sure, but.
Brian, you might speak to, if they do replace the windows, what would be the expectations relative to what the replacement windows would be?
Well, I would expect them to fit the original opening. Is that what
But-
you're asking?
Well, the construction.
Well, a wood window and 9/9, I think that would be very appropriate. And I think it would look good on that street. I think the street would be very happy to see something like that.
I'm sympathetic. These are probably old, but federal houses are rare. We've torn down a whole slew of them in Franklin. So it makes me sympathetic to writing the architecture of something this early.
If he came before us in 1908, which there was no historic zoning commission, well, it would be denied to change him to 1/1.
Right. Well, and I don't bring up the theoretical conversation because I agree or disagree with the applicant. It's more of, I'd like for the conversation to be framed around one or the other to make sure that we're, following that theory all the way through the process and not mixing and matching.
Well, so on the theory that you've gotten, we haven't gotten to it yet, and that's the addition, the
Right.
frame addition to the right, facing the house. And I'd like, are we headed to that next?
Yes, we are.
Before we
There's a
do-
rhyme and method to my reason.
Because
Before we
be-
do that, before we leave the front facade here, the asymmetry that you referred to, of course, is the trickiest part that you have to work with. And my thought is that the addition of the shutters, even though I agree appropriate, yes, but I wonder if the shutters will emphasize the asymmetry. And I know that you're going to approach that very carefully, but that was one comment about the shutters. And then the other comment is that, just for the record, I would feel more comfortable if we had more information about the actual windows, the condition of the windows, and how we can sort of estimate the age of the windows.
But the asymmetry actually tells the story of the house, so I don't want to deny the asymmetry of it or try to mitigate it.
That's kind of where I'm talking about. There's character that if you were doing anything new, it would look silly if you tried to reinvent that idea. But since it's already there, it's kind of got a nature about it. And I always, even people with floors are uneven. They're like, what should I do? And I go, you should just call that character.
Embrace it.
So, that's kind of where I come from on this too, is just, let it have that character.
It
That's
makes it unique,
part of
and
the
I had
story.
so many people call about this property when it was for sale. So many questions like, well, I want to make it symmetrical, it's not symmetrical, and I would inform them that that's the character of this house, and, it's not likely to be approved to be changed to that
And
effect. So
one
I
more-
appreciate what the applicant's proposing here.
One more comment to the windows. I'd be curious, when you really get to looking at this, especially on the ones on the first floor, any evidence that those were made longer? That part of the brick was knocked out or something to?
Not any evidence that I saw. You mean at the top, like they were made taller?
Or at the bottom, the bottom or the top, or do you think that's original in their height?
I think the height is original. Did you notice anything there?
I have not noticed anything on the brick. I also think inside you have 11-foot ceilings, and the windows, I believe, are 8 feet. So they're quite proportional to the overall height. I think if the windows had been 6 feet, you'd have like a 4-foot kind of wainscot before you'd actually get to your window. So I do think from the interior perspective as well, they are very proportionate to the first floor residence.
They are, the head heights of them are actually a little higher than a lot of the houses that I go into that are kind of around this vintage, but I just, again, kind of say, well, that was just kind of the folk interpretation of it at the time they built it. So I didn't really think like they had been modified.
All right, does
Yeah,
anyone else have any comments?
I would just add on, I'm curious to hear more about what you all think the actual age of the windows is. Because what I'm hearing, and it may be wrong, is kind of turn of the century is what you're anticipating.
I know they can't be any older than that simply because in the parlor, they're on a rope mechanism and they're snapped, and the rope, you would have probably used, I mean, I'm sure you could speak to this. I don't even know if they used chain back in the, before 1800 in terms of anything other than, I mean, they're on a rope mechanism, and the hardware on them is also very indicative of kind of a turn of the century.
Okay.
And we're happy to provide more photos of any details that you would like.
Okay, are there any more questions on the windows on the front? And then we have not talked about the replacing the door on the front. Is
No,
that-
I would like to hear from the subcommittee on the side lights and the doors.
Okay. Comments on the satellites, on the doors?
So I had a question. So currently they have the glass in the doors. Is that what you were just going to do, add a panel? Or are you going to completely replace the doors?
The desire would be to replace the doors with something more historically accurate for the timeframe of the house.
When do you think what age do you think are on those doors?
I would again say I think they were added at the turn of the century. All the hardware on it is very of that time period. There's a lot of kind of craftsman Art Deco latches on them from the interior side. I would say that's probably based off the hardware when they were added to the residence.
I wonder if it wasn't a single door with side lights. Is that possible?
I think given the proportion of the door, it very well could have been. I've seen examples of mid-19th century doors that are awkwardly wider than a singular door, but also too narrow for a double door, which is kind of what we have here. Where what they would do is trompe-l'oeil again, and they'd split it, but it would be a singular door that would open on the front, which is actually one of the examples in the slideshow that I provided on another antebellum home in Natchez, Mississippi.
What is the width of these existing doors?
I'm gonna guess, I don't remember that
But
specifically.
they appear to be less than 3 feet.
Oh, yeah, they are. They're more like 2'3" each or something like that.
Exactly,
They're
yep.
kind of narrow, maybe 2'4". I can definitely make a note of the width of them. I actually see both in projects that I've worked on, and I've seen the double door and I've seen a single door. It's kind of 6 half dozen the other. I think it was just really a preference thing at the time.
Well, you have Carnton. Carnton's an example.
Yes.
So is the Carter House. And like I said, 3rd Avenue North, the Marshall House on 3rd Avenue South. So back to the side lights. So is that kind of what you had more in mind for the side lights?
Yes, so the image, so at Carton, we know it's a double door, and as you can see at Carton too, they have the panes on their side lights as well. And then the image prior to it, again, you can see this is a much more Greek revival, but the door is significantly more similar to ours. You see a split door with the side lights with a rectilinear painting, which I think is more or less how we would interpret it.
This is an aesthetic opinion, strictly, but the look of and the simplicity of the 2 panes without any break, just the straight panes, including the panes in the door, I think add an elegance that's kind of emblematic of that focal point, I would say. But that's just an opinion.
No, you're just talking about dividing the side light, though, not the door. You're thinking of a solid door?
Correct.
Right.
So-
So,
And that's what I'm not quite understanding about the surround here. Is the intent to pull all of this out and have something completely new that has some framing on the top, or is it to work with the existing side light, add some bars to these side lights, keep the existing transom, and then change the doors out to solid doors?
The transom is kind of what's informing the decision, because I know
Okay.
it's the most original part of that door. You can tell by the way it is paned, and it's the simplicity of its kind of, it has really no molding detail. It's strictly just pieces of wood with glass. You know it's very old.
Right.
But you can tell that the 4 pieces of glass that are actually at the door level are not very old in their nature. And I haven't really explored the option of either adding
Okay.
it to it, or if it's something that would have to be replaced given the nature of the glass.
Okay, that helps me a lot, because I thought maybe the intent was to remove the transom,
I
which
know,
I would
it's a
recommend
detail we really
against.
love, so we actually
Definitely
want
a
to
keeper.
possibly restore it to actually being
Okay.
functional again with the chain, so.
I just feel like, and I don't really have the historical example to back this up, but I just feel like the glass doors themselves and the side lights just sound like a early 20th century thing to me, and not a mid 19th or even late 19th century thing. I could be wrong, because I know there are late 19th century houses that are Victorian that have large single pane pieces of glass, which might lead you to think that they did this sometime in the very late 1800s. And I don't know that exactly, but I've always felt going by this that the doors didn't quite seem to match the house. They do seem like a more modern interpretation to me, just gut feeling.
Do we think the glass is original in the side?
No,
And
not the side
No.
lights.
It's a very different quality when you see it.
The reason I said that, is it possible that it was a single door with side lights, is that the side lights seem a bit out of proportion to regarding the transom. And that's why I thought if it were a bit wider, then maybe you would have a single door. So that's just from what I can see.
I kind of was back and forth on that as well. The only thing that made me think that it was maybe the side light, at least the area of it was original, was that it was almost the width of one of the panes in the transom. That a lot of times they just came straight
Right.
down as opposed to being a little wider. But it's conjecture for me, that's more gut, just looking at it to say, what do I know and what does this compare to? And, the other thing we got to keep in mind that there are a lot of folk iterations of these things that happen too, and they didn't necessarily go by the rule book, so.
I think I would suggest doing some more investigation into the doors and the side light and the transom. Actually, on the interior, you could try to remove some paint and see if underneath the layers of paint you find any graining. And if you find graining that would be, indicative of the period, you may know that what's actually there is older than it is. I think some more investigation would be in order.
Okay.
So the entry and the surround are not federal. So is the intent is to maintain something and have it to be more in keeping with the federal style. Is that something that's supported by the committee in general? I just want to make sure we give enough direction to the applicant.
That's a good point. And I don't know how long this house has looked this way as is, at least 50 years, probably, correct? And I know that part of our guidelines indicate that a historic home can acquire new historic features just through age. And I know 50 years is kind of the mark, correct?
It's the time by which the federal government could consider something historic. So it's just an interpretation of the commission at this point, have the changes to the building over time gain historic significance or not. It's kind of back to the conversation that, what Brian was pointing out with the addition.
I think just come back with something, and if it's compelling, and makes sense.
I think I'd kind of like to see explore maybe taking what's there and adding the divided light.
Okay.
And then, maybe see what you can do with the doors. But as far as changing out the entire thing, not sure that would be the best plan.
I don't think we have an intention of replacing the whole thing.
I really want to keep the actual surrounds. I think there's a real beauty in its kind of simplistic molding state. You can tell it's very original to the house, but I think we just kind of want to replace parts that were removed during this kind of, I don't know if the history of the house, it survived a pretty bad fire from what we understand, and it was around the turn of the century, and I think when it did get its fire, it went through a massive renovation on the interior as well as the exterior, and I think it really is now reflecting what was in vogue at the time of that, and I think what we really want to do is kind of give it a sense of what its original intention was.
I think it would be helpful to have photographs, detailed photographs of the door trim and the surround. That would be very helpful.
Of course.
Yeah, I agree, and I know that we're not to look at the inside, but based on what you've said with what you can tell from some of the hardware on the inside, I think that could be helpful as well, because I'm sympathetic to trying to meet that original intention.
Yep.
What's a little hard for me personally is that the replacement work is now probably 120 years old in and of itself. And so that just, is something that you got to factor in.
Yes, definitely.
Amanda,
Yes,
do we
it's-
have any other pieces to this that we need to go over?
I don't think so. To expound on what Mr. Denton just said, it's a tough discussion because there are obvious things that are not historic and replacement would be entirely appropriate, like the columns. And so it's just making decisions from there. Where do you draw the line between, restoring to a pure architectural style or keeping some of that eclecticism that it developed over time? I would agree that, keeping this around, the applicant's, comments on keeping this around would be entirely appropriate. I am excited about hearing more about the side lights and the doors. I think that could be compelling. So we can go ahead and move on, Aaron, to the addition, if you'd like to cover that. I'm trying to get a good photo angle so they can reference the actual existing conditions while you talk about it.
Yeah, it's a really hard photograph to get with the Magnolia. One thing that we would like to do is create a better relationship between the federal structure and this addition that has a very early 20s, late craftsman aesthetic to it, which it strangely also kind of bridges a colonial revival in its proportion as well. So it's, again, one of those hybrid structures, and what we would like to do is kind of embellish more, not necessarily embellish, but kind of work more towards that colonial revival aesthetic with it, so it has a greater relationship to the federal structure to its left. With that, we would like to adjust the door surrounds and then just add a pilaster detail, which would have been very common on siding structures of homes of this age. And it kind of just gives it a greater relationship to the brick portion of the house. And realistically, the siding is going to have to be replaced given its rot. So it wouldn't necessarily be a tragedy of loss per se from a functioning standpoint. The siding's going to have to be redone as it is. So it would just be an addition essentially to the current structure.
So just to help frame the discussion, right now, there is a bracketed roof covering, and so the applicant's proposing to remove that, add more of a colonial revival surround to the entry, which would not be catastrophic to anything because the siding, the applicant has intended to propose removing and replacing the siding. Right now, what kind of siding is this?
I believe it's wood.
It is wood?
Yes.
Okay. It's just a hard angle to tell. I thought it was wood, and then I
Yeah.
saw this picture. I'm like, maybe it's not wood. But no. Okay, so part of the application will be requesting to replace the siding. Can you elaborate on anything else that would change?
Currently, there is the left window on the second story is, I would say, about, 4 or 5 inches narrower. We would
Yeah.
like to reframe to have them symmetrical just from a aesthetic standpoint, so that we create symmetry on both sides. I'm not entirely certain why they weren't the same. I assume it probably goes back to the revisions on the front of the house with retrofitting and so forth, but we'd like to make them even on the second story.
Yeah, it's very odd.
Okay.
I have, Amanda, I've got 4 of these that just show the before and after if somebody, kind of the as-built.
Would you guys like to see
Does
those?
anybody want to see
I'd
them?
love
Sure.
one.
Okay, if you can just kind of share underneath the dividers.
We can share, can't we?
I'll ask a quick question. Is the overhang that you want to replace, is that original to that addition, do you believe?
It very well could be. Unfortunately, I don't have any photographic evidence
Yeah.
of the home prior to, I think, the 60s
share.
or so, like late 50s. And I think by also a lot of the photographs we have, the magnolia had
Kevin, I'd
grown,
like one too.
so it kind of
They can
obscures it.
share.
Right.
And I'll share with Victoria.
Perfect.
I'll give it back to you.
So having said that about the windows and about the intent of the guidelines is to change over time,
Right.
then I see the guidelines applying to change over time more to this addition. And the reason for that, and I see where you're going. I mean, you went to Williamsburg or Philadelphia or some places in New York and Baltimore. If this had been built first and then people became wealthier and they built the brick structure onto it, you could see being the same time period.
Right.
But that's not what happened in this place, in this case.
Right.
So it looks to me like that the stoop, the bracketed stoop and all that add a character of that change over time rather than trying to make it look like it was from that same time period.
Right.
And I think that is the intent of our guideline, and I think that's charming. That shows the change over time.
I would agree with that, that addition has always been noticeable as the period that it was added, and I wouldn't want to falsely knit the house together. I think it tells more of a story, and this house does tell a big story. So I wouldn't want to do away with telling that part of it.
I agree that the, eclecticism, and I'm using that word loosely, that the house evolves over time would be more appropriate to the additions over time as opposed to maybe changes to the more, to the existing build. So I would appreciate the applicant considering keeping the surround and then working with the surround to make some subtle changes to it. And, rebuilding the porch in order to be, have more appropriate, scaled columns and, adjusting the slope, but maybe just kind of leaving this element, siding aside, leaving this element, kind of its unique little appendage on the side. I do think that it's definitely not of a clear architectural intent. It has a lot of different things going on, and maybe that's okay. Maybe simplify and clean up over here and leave this more indicative of the time in which it was built.
Can we change the wonky window, or do we keep it in there as character?
Well,
You said wonky windows were character on the other building.
Hey, I didn't say I had to be consistent.
And your rendering is nice and appropriate. I mean, great concept. I want to ask you on the siding.
Mm-hmm.
How rotten is the siding? Could you just repair,
I'm
boards
sure
that have
some
rotted?
could be repaired. It's just, it's, this house has had a lot of neglect over the years, so I think there's a lot of water damage on the inside of the sunroom, so I think that has to be assessed, and clearly that's coming from an exterior element. So I think it would be best for it to be replaced in its original proportion and so forth. It's just, but if the contractor can assess that it's repairable, I'm sure we would go through it with that and repair it as, needed.
I would concur from what I know of this house with the applicant. I mean, I hope you can repair it, but there was a time that there really wasn't even a good, a roof. It was all leaky.
Yep.
And at one point in time, the Board of Realtors helped the Heritage Foundation put a roof on it because it was just such an important house. So I have a feeling your gut may be
Right.
the way it is.
So if you
Hate
were
to
to,
say that, but
if you were to replace, what would you plan to replace it with?
We would use a wood material in the same proportion to kind of nod to the fact that this was its original intention. Because I know obviously there are different proportions and silhouettes of siding, and this has a very specific scale, so we would maintain that. And more than likely, we intend to use very similar materials to what was used.
There's also an integral gutter on that addition, and that's been like the problem with a lot of the siding rot, is that it's gotten in back behind it. So we're probably going to need to not have the integral gutter, but place like a half round and clip to the outside of it.
that salesman came through Franklin.
Did he? The integral gutter guy?
There's integral gutters, a lot, quite a few, and they're really boogers on what
They
they
are
do.
problematic.
Yeah.
So the applicant did ask about changing the window configuration slightly. Does anyone have any comments on that?
Only that it seems consistent with the asymmetry that we see.
Unfortunately, I don't have a great angle of it, so I can't really show it to you.
It's not something that I necessarily noticed until we measured it.
Right.
And then you're like, wow, I've been looking at that all these years and that window's smaller. And I don't know if it was, I can't imagine what it originally was. You know, there was a little apartment up there, and there's a little makeshift kitchen in there. And I don't know why that one window would have been smaller unless it was retrofitted at some time, but there's not really anything we can see that makes it look like it was a retrofit. I mean, can you imagine doing an addition on your house that's like perfectly symmetrical except for that one window? That seems very odd to me. The main house, I can kind of explain it away because they were already there in the 3 and adding the 2 bays. And this one, I can't really explain why it would be that way.
On this addition, interior-wise, are they plaster or the walls plaster?
In the main part, they are
Yes.
partially
Yeah.
plaster, and then there's been
In this part,
drywall.
this actual addition where that window's located?
I don't,
I
think they're-
I haven't really
I
tapped
don't
them or
think they're
anything.
plaster in
Yeah, I don't
You think it's
most-
drywall?
I think a lot of this house has been drywalled.
Well, if you could, just investigate that a little bit more when you come to the board and
Yeah,
show what that's
help
like.
date it a little bit. Yeah, there's kind of, I think there's a wall board in there. But it may well have been done later because, like I said, they retrofit that into a little apartment.
It could have been because of water damage. It could have started out plaster, I don't know, but I think just come with the age of the window and what you know.
Right, because we think the addition's 1920s, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time and moving forward, I know that there's some miscellaneous proposals toward the end in terms of, let's see, replacing the stone on the walkway, fixing, existing concrete damage, adding a deck behind the building, and removing the door on the L of the roof access and replacing the same. So converting a door to a window. I already kind of reviewed some of these, and I do think that everything shown here is appropriate and, has merit being on, rear or lesser visible elevations. Does anyone have any comments on these? I'd like to go ahead and move forward with the outbuildings. Okay, so the outbuildings, we'll try to keep this short. The applicant's proposing to simply re-roof it, repair the siding as needed, repair the foundation as needed, add a door, and paint the siding, and then have some some steps that go into the smokehouse. I don't see any reason why any of this necessarily needs to go to the commission for review and approval, as the roof already has metal, correct?
It does not.
It's a shingle?
It is.
It is a shingle. Okay, I could not recall. So re-roofing with metal would be something that would need to go to the commission, but otherwise I find it would be appropriate to move forward with those changes. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that?
Just if you could find some stone, big pieces of stone for steps, that would be so
Okay.
cool.
And I notice it says new roof in black metal.
Yes.
And why, so can you kind of tell us why black was chosen?
Black is an aesthetic. I mean, it's found on Carton. Carton's roof is a black tin roof, and two, it really has the relationship between the color of the brick and then the proposed shutter color, which would also be a historic tone of like a greenish, almost black color. And you would find either black, red, or green roofs traditionally on homes of this age. So it was really just kind of picking between the tones of historically accurate roofs.
Under Welcome to Franklin,
Yeah.
we have a color that you would think was black, and we call it Belmead green.
Yep.
And it's one part green and 3
That's
parts.
really what he's
Is
talking
that what
about.
you're
Yeah,
saying?
exactly.
Yes,
Yes,
thank you.
yeah, it's very much
we
like
totally,
I call it Franklin green.
or
actually.
Frank,
I call it Franklin green.
Franklin green is when you put a tad more green in the
But to speak to the proposal to replace the metal with metal would be appropriate if it had metal on it historically. If it is historically shingle, the recommendation from staff would be to maintain the shingle. Now, the color of the shingle could be the interpretation of the applicant, of course, but the changing of the material would not be supported unless there's evidence to demonstrate that it was a different way historically. And sometimes there is. It just depends.
I would like to know, it's actually asphalt shingle. It is not a wood shingle currently. So that is,
So obviously it was not always asphalt shingle.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, so I just wanted to, it's not currently a wood
Right.
shingle. If it was a wood shingle, we would obviously keep it that way.
I have a question as to the use too. It's called a smokehouse, but it's made of frame and has siding on it, which makes me question whether or not it was truly a smokehouse. And do you have any idea of the age of the building?
I'm not sure, certainly, but the brick does match the cleaned brick of the main house, so it had to have, I assume, been sometime between 1820 and 1850. It is a two-story structure. What you don't see is actually on the back side of the property, you can go down a set of stairs and there's a full height. With, I believe there's some form of ventilation coming out of it. So I believe the smoking was actually done under it, potentially, and then you would hang the meat up above. So it's just kind of it's two parts. It's just you don't see that from this photo.
The framing, so
Yeah.
what kind of framing is it?
I believe wood.
I mean, as far on the inside, can you see the actual timber frame? Is it a timber frame or is it balloon framing?
Glanced in there, I think
Yeah.
it's a timber.
Yeah.
It's like a hewn framing
Okay.
Oh, wow.
that's in there, so I'll check that again.
So-
I don't think I'm
Some
misremembering
photographs of that would be nice too.
What I would recommend is lessening as much change to this building as possible. I would not want a regulation to kick in that would require it to be vented for flood purposes. So
Right.
lesser is more.
Yep.
So keep a shingle roof probably.
Okay.
But I will do more exploration. I needed to know a little bit more from you all, what you wanted to do, so I can advise you on that. Moving into the next one, this will definitely, if the proposal moves forward, would definitely have to be vented. So the proposal here is to take this barn, because the building, or the property already has two structures. One is a more of a minor structure, like the building we called a smokehouse at the last slide. And one is a more typical accessory structure, this barn. The property is not eligible for any new accessory structures per zoning ordinance. So the applicant's proposing to take this barn and convert it to a garage. I do have concerns about, how much demolition constitutes demolition. Dismantling could be demolition. So they would have to actually lift this up to pour a concrete foundation to serve as the slab for the garage and to alter it accordingly. So we would want to make sure that you have as much of that as possible. Alternatively, if you wanted to leave this and not alter it so much, you could seek a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals to build a new structure. I don't know whether or not that would be supported, but it's certainly an alternative to picking this up and risking it falling apart. By elevating this, adding the slab, I mean, you're going to trigger improvement that would require it having vents added to it, so it'd be a floodable structure.
Yeah, I don't think that's a difficult thing to accomplish there. In the flood thing, you're not really, you can't use drywall or
Right.
any improvements like that on the inside anyway. So we'll talk through that, and a lot of that'll have to do with the flood elevation and everything where that
Right.
lands, so.
And you don't have to elevate this building by any means, because it's not serving occupancy. So your slab could be a normal slab and have it added onto it. But I would like to talk a little bit more about the proposal to construct a new roof line, change the shape of the roof. You want to elaborate on that?
Yes, I think I found a photo from the 1940s of the structure potentially that had a different roof on it, and I didn't have it at the time.
Age, Mr. Chair, or something before we start this conversation?
I can't recall. A lot of the information I gave the applicant was actually supplied by Mr. Laster, who had done a lot of research on this prior to. Do you recall from Sanborn's how old these may be?
Let's
That's what I was
see.
gonna
I brought it with me. On the 1928 Sanborn maps, they appear to be, there are at least 5 outbuildings.
Right. And see, that's what I was thinking, and I couldn't remember if there was anything before that. 28 seems to be our
And what
most
is
popular number.
this outbuilding? What was its use, do you think?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What do you think the use was?
Of this,
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Well, we do have a 1913 map too that shows 2 outbuildings. And that may be these 2.
What we do know, Mrs. Wagner's father was a prominent veterinarian of Middle Tennessee from when he bought the house, and we have knowledge that this was his practice. It was a stable. If you go inside of it, I mean, I have not really spent time in it for many reasons, but you can actually see places where you could tie up a horse and like actually host some animals back there. There's actually stalls where you could have larger animals being held for treatment and so forth.
So it could have been a carriage house.
Correct, yes.
Right.
The
And
opening
it-
is definitely
and
large
it
enough.
probably would have predated him.
Yes,
When he was practicing in Franklin, I'm sure he would have had an automobile.
yes.
So, Aaron, you'd mentioned you've seen a photograph of this building with a different roof line?
I believe it is this building it's a old shot from Fair Street looking through the sunken garden, and it has more of an A-frame on it. And I believe it's the structure that, again, the house at the time had quite a few structures, so I could be mistaken, but I do think it is this, from what I could gauge.
So the intent would be to go back with something similar to
Yes.
that? Okay. Any thoughts on that?
Where would the driveway be?
And it's existing, so it would just, from where you enter currently, you would just go back.
It's on
So-
the right side of the
Yeah, it's on the
house.
right, so it would just, this structure is actually only, I would say, maybe 6 to 10 feet in from the current line of the driveway, so it'd just be a slight bend
Oh,
into it.
okay.
So the driveway would not have to go through the back. The smokehouse is on the left side of the property, right behind the original structure, and then the barn is way back.
See, that's back when we were working on
yeah.
the porch with columns.
Yep,
Because this property extends all the way to 96, doesn't it?
correct, yes.
And if you could, would you mind sharing that 1940s photograph
Right.
with Miss
Yes, I could,
Rose?
yes, I could scan it in.
Well, I do think it would be appropriate to change an alteration based on a historic photograph. I do think that's something that applicant should share with the commission for part of its consideration. But to give some context, here's the driveway, and Aaron, where exactly, you can't see this building from the street. I'm trying to get a good
So
angle.
the barn is, I call it the barn, but it's somewhere between the new addition and the current driveway, but it's back.
Right,
It's really not visible from
yeah.
the street, because it kind of goes, as the land does, it kind of goes down a little bit. So it is quite hidden.
And unfortunately, you can't see it from the aerial on this.
That's
'cause
what I
it's
was
too
trying to
over-
do.
Yeah.
Too overgrown. I think if you try to zoom in far enough, it blurs out.
Right.
And photographs of
But
the
it's kind of in
framing
this area,
would
correct?
help too.
Okay.
Yes.
But does that help to kind of get an understanding where it is on the property?
The Franklin site actually has the footprint of it on
Right.
there.
Mhm.
If anybody wants to look at that, we can include that information as well. But even the aerial on the Franklin site, it's probably the same one. It doesn't show anything.
I would only say that the word dismantling and demolition seem almost synonymous. And this seems like it's a unique and priceless kind of structure with a history. So it'd be a challenge, I think, to do what you are speaking of.
Could you use it as a garage with the current roof line?
I mean, most definitely, I don't think it affects the overall, I mean, we'd have to obviously check clearances of how
That's
things, and I
pretty
think
low
it's
on the
relative,
front.
yeah, so that might be the reason why,
But you're going to lift it up, put it on a slab,
right,
or that's the proposed.
yes.
Yeah, I don't think that's really going to be quite as difficult a process as it sounds. And it might be more of kind of an underpinning type situation once we get to it. We'll just have to
Yeah.
see where that is. As it is currently, it's fairly low and kind of dug in. Well, some of that's just vegetation, but it is dug in quite a bit.
So my recommendation to the applicant would be to continue to work toward a proposal. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you move forward with the accessory structures quite yet. I'd like to have some conversations with you about that and with other members of the department to see what we would recommend given your situation. But I would definitely move forward with a proposal for the house. You
Okay.
don't have to bring it all at one time. And based on your timeline and your intent moving forward, it may be appropriate to move forward on the house and then come back for the garages later. But the garages are kind of their own animal, and I think that, we could explore ways to try to make this a little easier for you.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Man, I think we need to move on. We've
Yes.
got another applicant that's been waiting patiently back there. So,
Thank you.
Kevin, Aaron, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very excited.
Good to see you
and
guys.
I'm glad that the home fell into such great hands.
Okay, this is discussion new construction at the right of existing residents at 111 Winslow Road.
Yes. So we have Miss Sharon McNeely here representing the project. She is the new owner of the property. She and her husband, John. And unfortunately, Mr. Harbinson, the architect, was unable to attend today. So I do have some slides and some information that he's prepared, but I will take direction from Miss McNeely rolling through.
Thank you all for having me. My husband, John, and I moved here 2005, and we bought a home that was the first home.
Can you speak, just speak a little closer to the mic there, I think.
Is that better?
And you can sit down if you want.
You can sit
I'm
down
gonna
if you.
stand up.
Okay.
That's fine.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
So
good.
in 2005, we moved here, took a home on West Main, and the name of the home is Brightwood. It's a corner of 9th and West Main. It was the first structure that was ever saved by the Heritage Foundation.
That, it was the first one that was ever moved.
Moved.
To be saved, not the first one that was saved.
It was the first one moved. It was behind Starbucks, and they moved it over to this vacant lot. That's our home. So then, we got a call, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, about the blue house behind Domino's Pizza. Well, we acquired that house, and we moved it to Linville, Tennessee. And that's the home now. It's the original structure in the front, the historical part, and then the guest house to the left was the addition we found off of the very, very back of the house that was a real gift.
And it was really, we think, the original structure. And the house was added in front of it.
Yeah.
I've got to correct myself one more time, Sharon. The first house we moved was one that John Robertson lives in. Rudy Jordan moved her house first. Then where John Robertson's house is on Second was moved.
Okay.
And if my memory serves me, then yours was moved.
Okay. Well, I just remember ours was, it belonged to the town drunk, I think, behind Starbucks. And it was not acceptable to be moved to Main Street. It was not in keeping. It wasn't large enough or grand enough.
It
And-
was very controversial.
Yes. Imagine that. Okay.
Imagine.
So that leads me to where we are right now, why I am here before you. My husband and I bought a lot in Miles Manor, and while we love preservation, as you can tell by the photographs I've shared, we have some challenges in front of us. This is our architect that we hand-selected to be a part of this project. His name is Jeff Harbinson. He's from Winston-Salem and from New York City. In New York City, he has worked on the Central Park, Empire State Building, a lot of sensitive and cathedrals. He's moved to Winston-Salem part-time, and we've been involved in Jeff's life for maybe 2 decades, and he's just very, very sensitive to his environment. So that's why we selected Jeff to be part of this project. He designed this cabin for us on a project we have in the mountains of North Carolina. And the siding would really throw this group. It's bark, so. But anyway, that's one of his projects. And then that's another home that he built for us on the golf course. So he just has really, really great talent, a good eye. He's very sensitive to his neighborhoods. So here is our lot. Y'all are familiar with, to the higher side would be Reed and Cameron Anderson's home. And our lot stopped, it started right where the garage is. And it slopes down and goes to Danny's lot, Danny and Teresa's lot. Right now, the garage has 3 walls. One side is where they entered, the original Bragg, was that the
Bragg,
name?
John Bragg.
So he took one wall for his entrance into the garage, and then another wall has nothing on the back but an unfortunate addition to maybe house like a lawnmower shed kind of thing. And so there's no wall there. So that leaves us with 2 walls.
Kind of helps show.
If we follow the guidelines and penetrate one of the 2 remaining walls, then we're left with 1 wall. So we are dealing with an 8% grade change from Reed's to Danny and Teresa's. So if we come out of the garage, that puts us in the air big on the lower side. It is not something that we think the neighborhood, we don't think it would fit into the fabric of the neighborhood. It would look like a new structure too high on the one end. So this is our lot. And then, let's see, Amanda, can you go to, that's the lower lot line, so you can see the grade change we're dealing with. So these are our 2 options we have to put a home on this lot.
Give me just a second, I'm gonna make sure I have the right.
If we were to keep the garage as a standalone building, which is the wishes of the committee on print, we feel like there might be some other opportunities that would trump what the guidelines are permitting and would fit more in the neighborhood. So the red marks, that's where we would penetrate from the front view, from the street, in to the garage. That would put all, and so you're not very far off of the street. It's not like this garage is at the back of the property. The only way to incorporate the home is to put it sideways and put it up against the setback line. So the back of our house would be on Danny and Teresa's side. Am I making sense with that?
Yeah.
I can help clarify too. The building setback shown is what's, recommended by the, or required by the zoning ordinance, that, this is the existing historic house, and so the footprint would not permit the front of the new house to be any closer to the street than this one, to keep that setback. So that's where that line would be, and that would be where the line is for the new house over here as well. That leaves a very small amount of area between the garage and that setback line. So while a house could go there, I want to preface to say that, in talking with the architect, they're having a difficult time figuring out how to utilize the garage and add a new door to the garage to access it without getting too much into the building envelope. If you were to do it from the front, which was one thing I had suggested maybe looking into to try, which is not ideal, but that would create your building footprint here. And then we're going to go to this side.
That would be the second option, coming into the other wall. And the grade on that side, I would say, so from Reed and Cameron's side, you would pull in your car, you would pull into grade in the garage. If you look at the structure from our side, there's probably 4 feet of difference between the grass and the grade of that garage where the car would pull. So we just would really
See the
enjoy,
difference.
see, so what about the other angle?
I just wanted to make sure they understood
Okay.
the grade challenges. Right now, the door's here. To put a door here or here, you're going to have to adjust the grade on the inside to make that work.
And it would take, for 2 cars to go in there, it would take up the whole wall, one of the 2 stone walls.
We talked about this one, correct?
And that's the one where the driveway comes up the center of the lot and turns in. Again, it would be almost like a ramp going up into the stone garage. So that shows Reed and Cameron's and the existing structure, and then one that would be an option to build sideways. And so Danny and Teresa would be looking at the back of our house. And it's, I mean, we love the neighborhood because of the charm. We don't want to not fit in. We don't want to make people uncomfortable with us on the front end, building something that is not appropriate for the neighborhood. So we are asking for you all to help us with our challenges. We would ideally like to incorporate the stone walls into the house. Pay homage to the structure from the interior.
When you say incorporate the stone walls into the house, are you saying take them down and then use the stone in the structure?
I wouldn't
or-
hope to. We
Yeah.
would have to penetrate one of them just to get in there.
Right.
But, I mean, I'm as concerned about the outside as the inside. Those 2 existing, that big existing hole for the car to drive into presently, what do I put there without it looking not good?
I think I can jump in here to really help.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. So, I've had a lot of conversations with Mr. Harbinson and the McNeelys, and I suggested they come at this point, prior to rendering elevations, because this is a very difficult concept. I recommended that the guidelines would support preserving and maintaining this structure. Now, just a little background, I think everyone's aware that this structure used to belong to this building. This property has been subdivided off, and so it's sort of orphaned now on this lot. And Sharon chose this lot and wanted to preserve and respect this building. As going through the process of just investigating, I think the challenges became very obvious. And so everything that we've already shown you today is things that I've talked about and worked through. The proposal to maybe work from the front was one that I proposed to just explore to see how it would work. And you can see that it does kind of create a mass that's pretty concentrated to one side, which isn't as typical of the street where, placement of the building on lots. So the applicant is looking for some feedback from the DRC about integrating the house or the garage into the new structure, meaning it's part of the new structure.
It would be part of the footprint.
Yes, and when I gave some guidance on that, I suggested, if it comes to that, then it's part of the new structure, then we want it to read as if it were an addition, quote unquote, to the new structure. So you could tell over time that the property's evolved, that this used to be, a part of the structure that's not fully integrated to the point where you wouldn't tell that it used to be standalone. But maybe connecting it to the new structure and having a different garage would be a way to preserve the structure to a degree without causing damage to and encountering the significant challenges of opening up the wall for a garage door and then impeding severely the building footprint otherwise. So did I summarize that well? So making this part of the footprint of the house, correct?
And I would like to just say, we're not talking about anything larger than a two-bedroom home. It's not like it's going to be a big, big home.
So
It's
about what
just
square footage are
two-bedroom.
you thinking?
3,000.
And they're working at a 1.5-story scale.
Okay. So I know this is blasphemy, but what would happen if that garage just disappeared? And you take it down?
It would be recommended by staff to keep it and try to
I
integrate it into the
understand
house
that.
as opposed.
I understand that, but that would give a little more flexibility to the architect to design something that fits better, knowing that this lot slopes, and I'm guessing that's about a 6-foot drop at least, from one
8.
side to the, it's 8?
It's an 8%
That doesn't surprise
drop.
me. But or somehow, as you said, incorporate that into the house itself, the design, and as Amanda said, create another garage. And I don't know any more than that,
And,
as far as how to do that, but
I explained to the architect who's really trying to follow all the guidelines. That sometimes they're guidelines for a reason, that, we're trying to color inside the lines. It may not be possible in this particular lot. We've inherited a situation that is rather difficult. So I think Sharon's looking for suggestions and feedback on how to either work with this garage or not. I don't know that you had wanted to remove it entirely, did you?
No.
She'd like to keep it.
okay.
And if it became such an issue, we would come back and ask, but the stone is indicative of the neighborhood, and we would want to use the stone.
I got it. I understand that, and I know that it could be used.
And
but
I wasn't bragging about our homes, but I wanted to paint a picture to y'all that we are preservationists.
And I'm trying to get it too from the standpoint of, this is a very tough situation. I get it. It's a very tough lot to deal with because the whole thing has been subdivided now. And I know that garage went with Reed and Cameron's house, and, but it would just seem, of the two I don't like either of the two options that were shown, and I don't know that you do or you don't, but especially to make an L shape out of it, that doesn't.
It's just not in keeping with the fabric.
No, it's not.
all.
And that's why I think that the real stumbling block is this garage structure that sits on that lot and how to work around that. So that's why I'm,
And it has 2 walls.
yeah, I've been in it, so I understand it. And it's not real nice inside as it is right now.
Yeah,
So-
I think that for me, part of the challenge is normally you wouldn't see an accessory structure on standing alone on a lot, because we'd be dealing with how we're in court, how we're not disturbing the accessory structure on the, and so subdivision occurred before my time here, but it is what it is. And so one thing that bothers me about that option is there is a lot of character in the design with those 2 smaller windows in front, and if you just cut a big bay, I think that really doesn't do it justice in a way that, while normally we wouldn't be trying to add the main structure to the accessory structure, we're just in a different situation here, so.
And you all, this little, I call it a neighborhood subdivision, it was actually sold in little small parcels, and you
25
bought
foot.
so many of them. So actually, this really isn't so different as how it was originally sold. It's
So-
interesting.
But you know, the neighbors, I hear they're a tough group.
My suggestion as staff, if I'm so inclined, would be to, rather than remove this or to sacrifice it for, a garage door, like Mr. Denton said, and force a form over here that really isn't indicative of neighborhood, maybe put the form of the house across, part of the house would be in front of this, make a small, enclosed connector to this garage, so you're only removing like one of these windows, and then use this as some sort of a room as part of the house. That way you can still read that it was a garage, that a connector could be removed in the future if so inclined by a current or future owner, and it's doing less harm.
I would have to concur with that, Amanda.
I was gonna say, so you've got an opening in the garage now, and you need to relocate the opening because you don't have access to it. So
Yes,
the
sir.
stone that you're removing for the new opening, could it not be repurposed to close the existing
Yeah.
opening?
Right.
And
That was kind of my thought.
And with this lot, I know it's not indicative of a retire-in-place type of floor plan, but you may think to keep the height from the base from being so tall out of the ground, you may consider stair-stepping the house as it moves back on the lot some. Now, that may require some steps internally, is the reason I said it's not ideal for a retire-in-place type of floor plan.
We played with what would be the next phase, and it's like one bedroom on each floor. That would be it. That's all we could do, because you have got to get into the garage. And we had played with putting and it's being presumptuous to even say that we looked at what the next chapter might be if you gave us the leadway. But it was, if you put the garage in the back corner of the property, you've got to come around the house and come in. And that seemed to be about the only way we could utilize that. And of course, we'd have to build on top of the garage. That's how you get the second floor.
My
So
recommendation.
take the roof structure off and build a,
So my recommendation would be to use this area in front of the garage, in this area here, and then back through here for your home. Have a slender connector here. This will be part of your home. Then you have your driveway here to land at a garage at the back. That way you're still keeping this intact and you're minimally altering it in order to allow for it to be preserved and maintained on the property. You're able to use it as part of your home, and then you don't have the grade challenges you would otherwise. Not to say there won't be grade challenges. There are grade challenges on the property, but I can fully respect and understand the challenges of using this as a detached structure on this property.
Well, if you took that form, which I'm looking at as buildable area, and you pushed it up to engage with the garage, then the driveway could go on the right-hand side.
Correct.
And you could
Yes, sir.
circle around the back of the house.
Yes, sir.
And there can be a secondary, an actual, detached accessory build.
Right.
Yes.
But I don't think you can get the square footage if you have to pay homage to the garage being used as a connector.
I don't think that's what Ms. Rose is saying. I think there's a separate connector that goes from the new house to the garage.
To what garage?
Well, to what the garage building, whatever you want to call it.
new
Okay.
garage.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, and that could be another, that could be another function room. But the best scenario when you have something like that is to set it apart and to have a connector to the new part so that it's obvious that it was added onto. And it's going to tell the story.
This ultimately, Ms. McNeely, would look like an addition to your house.
but we have to come off the front of that
Right.
for,
Right.
and on top.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with taking the roof line off and adding a second story on
It's
top
the
of
only
that.
way you can get the second floor.
Oh, yeah, I understand there wouldn't be a second floor on that piece of it if you were just connecting
But see,
otherwise.
what we were trying to do is build from the high side so that we weren't peering over Danny on the low side. So the driveway would be on the lower side, and the building would, the mass of the building would be right in front and on the left. I guess what I'm saying is, will you give us the leadway to work with this as not a separate structure?
Well, in my mind, how the whole neighborhood is going to look trumps as much as is going to be done to the garage anyway. I mean,
And the thing that we do look at really closely is how the height of the house relates to the other houses.
Right.
And that's
So
what
that's
we're
gonna
so
be really
concerned.
key,
Yeah.
and by and large, we tend to follow along those lines. So,
the
so you
height-
have to really look
yeah.
at Cameron and Reed's house and what their height is to get your height. And that's really going to, you know.
And that's why we, because of the height in the guidelines, we don't have as big a footprint as we need. So that's why we've got to see if we can utilize it as not a garage, but utilize it as a room inside the house, and the second floor go on the top of it.
So staff can support the garage being connected to the house and utilized as part of the house, but I'd like to do more research with the applicant, have conversations with the architect, because I don't think that at this point in time I can support removing the roof, and to me, that would be tantamount to just tearing down the structure.
Yeah, you might as well eliminate it at that point. I agree. I think it needs to be, it could be an element of a floor plan, and it could end up being the kitchen or a dining space or a sunroom or something to that effect. But you would not remove the roof. It would be a one-story element in your house that's connected. It could be 2 stories. I mean, you said 3,000 square feet. 3,000 square feet's a lot for a 2-bedroom house.
It is, but what you're dealing with is the height. That's where we draw the line with even building anything in Miles Manor. We are not going to build something that the neighborhood would talk about.
Oh,
And what I could almost
I
see,
understand.
yeah, what I can almost see is that the main portion of the house that you'd be building would sit lower than the current historic structure, and maybe in connecting, you do have to go up a couple of stairs internally to that.
Well,
So that's just, but I think the architect will be able to help work through all that.
we, again, could we go back to the floor plan? Or the site plan, yes.
This one?
Mhm.
Okay.
It's interesting, this was predictable when this lot was divided,
Yeah.
Yep,
this
yep,
for
yep.
sure.
We
Really?
knew
Yeah.
that, yeah,
Yep.
that this day was coming.
I don't feel strongly that this would this height here would overwhelm this particular structure to be determined. I do feel like, you could wrap around this because you would want to take advantage of your building envelope, and you would need a place for your driveway, so it would be kind of over here. So if your driveway's over here, you're going to have some space between, so it doesn't feel like it's looming over this property. I know that Ms. McNeely feels strongly about keeping that, that height low, and I can't tell you how much I respect that. It's very refreshing to have someone want to work with that, but I don't know that staff has the concern about the looming over that you would see here, because this isn't a realistic placement, because the driveway would need to be here.
And so if you are on the lower side of the looming structure, it wouldn't be looming, but the house, you would go back to the corner, far corner, and come back in and pull into the back left corner of the lot. That's where the garage would be, where it would not be visible.
Oh, you want your garage to be back here?
Yes.
Oh, not here?
Yes.
I think that's a
Okay.
challenge.
Yeah,
If you're
it's
gonna
typ-
try to put it back there.
Yeah, I would think a typical configuration, you have your garage at the end of your driveway here.
And if I could just say.
Then it's out of the house.
Oh, you want your garage to be detached
In-
or attached?
Incorporated,
Okay.
yes. At least where you can walk from the elements.
I think you could do a detached with a breezeway connector to your larger form. Would that be something you'd be open to?
I don't know, I'd have to visit with the rest of the family.
Okay.
If I could just say, you used the word leeway, and, I mean, we exist here to put eyes on these problems so that we can give leeway wherever we see that it's justified. And so once we are given, I think, more information and more detail in terms of design options, then we'll be able to articulate what that leeway would
Well,
look like.
again, we did not want to be presumptuous in saying, okay, this is what we can do. We just wanted to visit with y'all and see that y'all were understanding our challenges. But we would really really respectfully like to be able to look at incorporating the walls into the house.
I think if you can leave the roof form,
It can't. That's the hardship, is the roof.
well, I have to disagree with that, because we just looked at a brand-new house here that's got a sunroom that's of another piece that's a lower level. I mean, I think it's possible to retain the roof form and still achieve what you want to do. It's a challenge. You've got the challenge of the existing floor elevation in the garage, and if you're utilizing that for living space, then you've got to, somehow either have a step up somewhere in the house where part of the house is at the same finished floor elevation as the garage, and the front of the house is at a different finished floor elevation, or the garage alone is at that finished floor elevation and it has some function in there, a sunroom, a kitchen, or something to that effect, and you have to come up steps to get into it.
So y'all are saying that y'all, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Y'all want it to stand alone. It can be incorporated, but that's what you want, even though it still has just 2 walls right now. And it will only have 1 when we penetrate it.
You've got a very experienced architect. I think we've got one architect up here, a professional architect. But anyway, I and some of these other folks are not professional architects. We can give you some input on what we see, but I think this guy that you've hired has got to meet the challenge on what this lot is and try to incorporate that structure, if he can, into what you need to achieve.
So they told me it was just almost impossible for it to fit with taking the roof off.
You heard me
Without-
say what I said originally.
Yes, sir.
And
Thank you.
I don't know, I'm kind of still in that direction, but we don't like to see historic structures torn down. So,
Yeah, and
But you're really not tearing it down.
Well,
You're
I think-
incorporating
I
it.
think the challenge is, and what I feel like you've given us a lot of good information on, is making a compelling case for the accessory building to not be kept as an accessory building separate from the main structure. Like, I feel like, again, the subdivision is what it is, and it's happened, but I feel like I could get behind supporting making that part of the home as opposed to a separate building from the home. But I think when you start talking, from my perspective, when you start talking about taking off the roof and just making it be appear as a portion of a wall in the larger home, I think that kind of defeats the purpose of it, of the historical significance of the building for me. So,
And so I do respect that, but it just will be one wall when all that's finished.
well, if you keep the structure of the roof, it wouldn't be just one wall. I mean, it would still be, I mean, you'd have to close up the other two that you've indicated
And what
are
do you
open.
use for that?
I think the architect's gonna have to put together some proposals for us to
Well, I
look
mean,
at
we
there.
only have so many skins we can, put, and it's still gonna look like an enclosed garage.
Could I maybe interject, Chair? What you showed us, these two site plans, is there still one more plan that we need to see that really reflects what you were talking about with having a new garage that's attached to the new home? Is
No,
that
ma'am.
right?
I did not do that on purpose because we did not want to be presumptuous.
Okay.
We wanted to be respectful of the guidelines.
So where we are right now, just to recap and move forward, is that, it sounds to me like the design review committee is informally giving an opinion that using this garage as part of your house could be supported given the site constraints. However, it would need to feel as if the house evolved around it over time, and that is still, in the future could be, the connection to the house could be removed so that this is freestanding if so desired. That would mean that it's not just the walls and then a building built over it. It's a structure that is not freestanding anymore, but has the appearance of having been added to the house. So what I can do is I can schedule a call with Mr. Harbinson and you, and we can talk through this so I can relay what I was hearing from the commission, and we can explore options for that. Or if you choose to move forward with a request to demolish the structure after having conversations, then you can certainly move forward with that request as well.
Well,
It does not mean it would be
This is-
supported, but you could certainly
this
make the
is
request.
off the wall,
Mhm.
okay? What if, and I would really sort of reserve my judgment to understand how wonky it ended up looking incorporated into the house. I agree about the second story. I mean, then you've just lost it anyway. What if the architect looked at actually moving the garage so it became, and rebuilding it in its form, so it became the attached garage on the back? And it's still
We
red.
talked about that. We did talk about that.
Mhm.
I don't want to misspeak for the architect, but it sounded to me that there's no ability to ensure the integrity of the structure through moving it.
Correct. If you moved it, you might be rebuilding it.
Right.
Right. But to me, how the house ends up looking in the context of the neighborhood kind of, we got to get to where that looks okay. And, and if you don't incorporate it to get it to look okay because of the grade, the priority in my mind is to get a structure that, given the grade of the lot, works in this context.
It's a huge challenge.
And I hope you could do it, making that, as you said, look like a room, right? I mean, a addition that was, you clearly saw what it was.
Man, I think your suggestion is good. Schedule a call with the architect and Ms. McNeely and see what you can brainstorm
Okay.
and come up with. I mean, that seems to be we got different perspectives up here.
Well, again, I certainly appreciate
And for
the
the sake of
owners.
time, I think we need to
Right.
move on.
I appreciate the owners and the architect working really hard to explore all these options, and I certainly understand and wanted to offer them this opportunity to speak to you about it. So I'll continue to work forward with them and explore additional options. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I promise to keep this short and sweet. Thank you for your patience. As you all know, we are working on updating the Historic District Design Guidelines, and we're super excited about it. Things seem to be going really, really well.
Great.
I wanted to offer you an opportunity to provide some feedback on just an overview of the key changes we're proposing. The plan is to have a draft out for the public to review and provide comment on in October. And as, I'm just gonna, hold on a second.
Ken?
That's all right. So, the plan is to have a guidelines draft for the public in October, and as corresponding as part of that, we would have a second survey available, so folks can comment on the draft through the survey. The survey that we had previously was very well, received. I believe we had over 550 responses to that, and I read each and every one, and wanted to make sure that we, if someone responded, that I, read it and digested it. So, what we're looking at moving forward is, we're on yellow right now, which is a review of the key changes. There will be a special site visit at City Hall on the 4th, as I mentioned, and then our public draft release the 28th. At that point, we'll reevaluate and move forward with our plan. We're hoping to have an approval of this whole document by February-ish. So in September last year, we talked about some key changes we wanted to make to the guidelines. Those goals are listed here, and I just want to show you how we've tried to meet each of those goals. So as far as framework changes, this is the framework we're working toward. As you can see, there are some key differences between this and our current guidelines document. Right now, as one of our applicants mentioned, we have a residential section and then we have a non-residential section. And sometimes when you're talking about non-contributing elements or buildings within there, it can get a little confusing. So what we've looked into is having residential, commercial, civic, accessory, and moving forward. And then also within those chapters for residential, you have your key preservation considerations. Then this is the section where you're working specifically on the historic building. This is the section when you want to add to a historic building. Here's the section when you want to alter or add to a non-historic building. And then just the new construction section. So it's really, really clear. Hey, Amanda, I would like to build a new house. What section should I look at? Is definitely just right here. Amanda, I would like to work for, adding some new doors to an addition on a building. Then maybe it's right here. So it's a lot more clear and gives a lot more pointed guidance on historic versus non-historic elements in between. So this will be like a flipping book, like our zoning ordinance, so I can actually send a link to specific pages within the document to get people in the right direction. So, yes, commercial will be exact same way. Yeah, I just did a shot here just to kind of show you. So commercial buildings, it'll have your key preservation considerations and everything here just for commercial. We'll actually have a section for civic buildings. That's one thing that we don't have right now. Civic kind of gets grouped into non-residential, but civic doesn't always have the same elements as a non-residential building. A building on Main Street is not of the same form and character as a church or a school. So having that extra section can help give really pointed, specific guidance to folks working in those elements. So I wanted to give you an example of our graphic style. That's not really, really nice. I'm very excited about this. You can see in our graphics the dimensional qualities of the windows. You can see, this is specific to sign placement and type, so you have all those different ones called out here, but we want to be able to provide a lot more graphical visual imagery to our applicants, because sometimes, like you all, you're very visual learners, and you want to be able to not only read the guidelines but see them in action. So I'm very excited about this. So some of the key guidelines updates we're proposing for additions would be that we do have those individual sections for additions to historic buildings versus non-historic buildings, etc. We are providing more specific guidance on placement of additions, side, rear, being very, very clear on when side's appropriate and how it is appropriate, if it is appropriate, the form of additions in general. Right now, we have about 5 guidelines for additions. We'll have a whole section on them now for each commercial or residential, because that's what our applicants are needing. They're needing more specific guidance on that. And we have revamped dormers in their entirety, both for additions and for existing buildings and for garages, whether they're existing or new. The graphics will better illustrate appropriate and inappropriate placement of additions and those forms, how they should connect to the buildings. And we'll have guidelines that address additions on larger lots. That's something that you all have asked for some guidance on. So essentially, there'll be more language to help the commission determine whether or not an addition might be larger than 50% and when that could be okay if the site conditions are appropriate. For signage, which is probably the application that staff receives the most. You don't see a lot of those because we do handle those administratively for you. We will have a whole comprehensive chapter with helpful classifications, including the items listed here. Where signs should be placed, materials of signs, the character of them, color, number, illumination, types. And so that illustration that I showed you previously will kind of play along into that. Each sign type is going to be illustrated, and it'll be to show appropriate placement. So we'll have a sign type listed, and they'll have an example to show exactly what that means and where that's proposed to be appropriately placed. Those sign types and that terminology will match our zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance was updated in December 2019, and so we do have some differences in words, especially where signs, that will get those matched up, so it'll be very clear for folks moving through for permitting for signage. I approve and Victoria approves signs on behalf of the commission as is your, you've extended to us, but all signs require permits. So we're trying to help streamline the process for the applicant in a lot of different ways in that respect. We're also providing a lot more guidance on lighting for signage. It's something we've heard loud and clear from the commission. Building lighting in general, but also lighting for signage. We have very little in place right now as far as lighting goes. We'll be able to give the applicants what they're asking for in that respect. So I just mentioned building lighting. Accessory structures, we're going to have a much more expanded section on that to address historic versus non-historic. Placement, size, scale, dormers, intricacy is related to the principal structures they serve, and then better graphics to illustrate placement appropriately and inappropriately. Sometimes it's not my favorite to do all the time, but I've noticed through this process that sometimes showing appropriate placement isn't as helpful as showing it paired with inappropriate placement. So we'll have some examples there to kind of help folks move along. As I mentioned, we'll focus on sections for specific treatment for non-historic structures. We're not going to have, it's not going to be a free-for-all change. We've got some guidance based on the comments that you've given us throughout the process, but it'll have more built-in and clear flexibility for those types of structures. We will be proposing to the commission to allow for a bit of expansion for administrative review. Right now, staff will administratively approve, if the guidelines are met, signs, fences, awnings, HVAC equipment. So we would like to extend that to minor alterations to rear and obscured facades, such as adding maybe some rear doors, replacing non-historic windows, similar. That would not ever be anything on a front facade, but just rear or obscured facades. So we can talk a little bit more about that. Again, civic buildings being added to address things like appurtenances, like steeples and stained glass and things that aren't really specific to non-residential buildings entirely. I'm going to go backward. Does anyone have any questions or comments on those items?
Is it possible that we could actually see this before it's released so that we could comment on it?
I will talk to Kelly Dannenfelser and see how we're able to do that. Once it's released to you, it's released to everyone, but you'd like to see it before it's released? Is that what you're asking?
I thought that was what we were going to be doing anyway.
Okay, I will talk to her about that.
That's a
I do
good question.
want to schedule meetings with all of you individually as you review the draft to get your comments, just to be able to afford you that opportunity.
I love the opportunity as a group because sometimes what somebody else says triggers a thought.
Very good point.
And did we, I mean, you're going through this, but did we do something to address signage on new buildings? Because that's been one of our big problems, that we don't have anywhere to put the sign.
Yes, one of the guidelines I will be recommending is that as people are developing new buildings, especially ones that have multiple storefronts, is that signage is something that's considered inherent to that. Now, we won't know individual signs, of course, but you have to take into account placement and general sizing of signage
And
as part of that.
it contemplates that.
Yes,
And-
exactly, contemplating the sign location, certainly.
And are we able to read the comments that drove the changes?
We can
From the
definitely
public?
provide the comments from the public. Some are not related to the guidelines update specifically. Most of them are. That is something that we can extract from that survey and provide to everyone.
That would just be good to know what other people see.
Yes, absolutely. And just to kind of give you a general overview of that, the bulk of the comments were related to compatibility. I can safely say from the percentages that most folks find that the historic districts are performing successfully, and that most folks are not as familiar with the guidelines document as they noted. They're somewhat familiar with the document or have not been through this process. But compatibility is very important to the most of the folks who completed the survey, and that some of the new construction buildings were not necessarily deemed as compatible to the downtown area as most folks would have liked based on the results of the
I've
survey.
had that feedback.
Right. But I can certainly get you all that, send that to you via email.
I think Kathy had a comment.
One little thing when you were showing the perspective of the corner look of the building and the description of all of the attributes, and you mentioned about, would it be I think for me, like for signage and all, it would be helpful to see a human figure for scale.
Okay, that's something we can certainly have
To
added.
See the relationship of the sign to the building to the person walking under or near the sign.
Sure. That's a very helpful, thank you.
And maybe if it showed the historic building in the other corner, so that you could see a relation within the context of the historic district.
This is all intended to be historic buildings. Are you reading one as not being historic and then the rest being historic?
I'm reading that as the new building. on this
Okay, well,
waiting
the
room.
intent here wasn't necessarily to show historic versus non-historic. It was really just to show placement of signage. But I hear your point that you would like to have more visual guidance on where signs should be placed on new buildings. We can certainly work on that. So speaking of signs, unless there were any other comments here.
Well, the only,
Go ahead. The increased administrative review, I think that's a good idea on things that are a no-brainer, you
Yeah.
know?
Mm-hmm.
It's,
That's responding to the public as well. There are a lot of times where applicants are, a little frustrated and waiting for things that are very obviously appropriate to move forward on otherwise. And so I don't want to take I don't want to take for granted the abilities of staff to be able to do these things. I'd like to have, clearly defined parameters, but it certainly it's responding to what we've heard. Anything else?
Well, I was just going to say, once somebody sees a picture, they go, oh, yeah, that's what we can do. And I guess that's why I don't want to let go of the idea if there could be a corner of a historic building or something to show that's what got approved. Or make that not look so much like the new building, one or something.
I think the intent is it's just a generic.
It
it's not-
is,
doesn't
it
relate to
is.
anything.
So-
But to your point, I think bad examples are as,
Yes.
have as big an impact as good examples.
I agree.
So would you prefer to see another one of these with inappropriately placed signs? Is that the suggestion?
Yes, I mean, things that demonstrate poor, what do I want to say, proportions and so forth, things of that nature, overwhelming.
Okay.
Especially with windows.
Well, we can certainly look into that. I know that, I try to use the quote-unquote inappropriate diagrams sparingly because I'd rather use that, time and resource to do something to help show someone appropriate. But sometimes there is some merit, especially as we were exploring accessory structures, to showing, what is not appropriate, or placement of additions, what is not appropriate. So we do have even, bird's eye views and different angles to show sections on pop-up additions and showing what that is and why that's not appropriate and things of that nature. So,
I think that makes sense where it's crystal clear
Right.
that it's a no-no.
Yeah, I had a professor that had an image that he showed. He was from Albuquerque, and they had like a mission style required, and it was a Kentucky Fried Chicken with timbers sticking out of it.
Yeah.
It's a bad example.
I see. Okay. Well,
That's
maybe
an
we can
architectural
work
review.
toward something for signage because I know that it's a common application and sometimes it can be difficult for folks to really wrap their heads around how to relate those guidelines specifically to their application. So we'll definitely look into that. But speaking of signage, we did want to ask you really quickly, I know you want to get home, but we spent a good chunk of time with you guys previously on talking about signage, and we have taken all that into account. One thing that we've noticed, and I'll let Victoria jump in anytime, but one thing we've noticed is that as folks are taking advantage of their upper floors, or they are trying to expand use of their upper floors, we do have some examples of storefronts where there are two entrances. This might be the main ground floor tenant, but then you have a door that goes really essentially right upstairs. We actually have several of those on Main Street. And so as we have worked within our current guidelines parameters on trying to limit signs to no more than 3 count per storefront, we've encountered some situations where it's more difficult to accommodate new uses upstairs or expanded uses upstairs. So Victoria has done some research in Charleston, South Carolina. Both of these images we're about to show you are from Charleston. And I'll let her kind of jump in and explain what we're looking at.
Yes, so what we are looking at here is an example where you have the access staircase with a projecting sign, but the main building on the bottom floor also has a projecting sign, and you can kind of see it in the image as well. They have the window signs. So technically this one probably has 4 signs total, but you do have the projecting arm that leads you up the access stairwell to this little bubble tea restaurant at the top. And then this one here, it's a little bit different. You do have the projecting arm for the shop on the first floor, but this other projecting arm sign tells you what is in the back. So their access is in the rear of the building. There's not an actual staircase that you can see from the front. However, what we liked about this example was that each office has their own little panel that is projecting.
So to kind of go over the concerns that we've encountered from some citizens is that sometimes buildings already have their 3 signs, and then someone upstairs is kind of stuck without having a sign, or trying to work through with the tenant below to change the existing sign so it accommodates them both. So for situations where we have upstairs tenants, and ideally, in staff's opinion, really more in situations like this where you have 2 entrances on the front. We'd like your feedback on whether or not maybe having a 4th sign would be appropriate, whether it is a projecting arm or a front-facing directory sign, if there's room to accommodate that, which the storefront really doesn't have. Just some feedback on how to make that work. This has actually come up 3 or 4 times in the last year on Public Square, and that was the situation. It wasn't pulled because of this reason, it was pulled for other reasons, but yes, that was exactly the same thing. We have it's come up a couple of times on Public Square and one other time on Main Street that I can recall, but it's been difficult for upstairs tenancies to provide direction to folks on how to get to where they are. But, if we could try to figure out a way to maybe accommodate using like a directory sign as a 4th sign where you can have multiple tenants listed, or in this case, because there is no wall to put that on, maybe just having an extra arm where it lists the multiple tenants, that might be an opportunity to explore.
So it's the same business upstairs and downstairs, or are they different businesses?
Different businesses.
Different businesses.
What we have commonly in our community is a ground floor level. Then when we do have the extra access, it's a stair that goes straight up, and then there's like 2 or 3 offices upstairs.
So do the guidelines provide for each tenant?
The
3
guideline-
signs, or for each, the ground floor, basically?
Right now, the guidelines read no more than 3 signs per building. And the interpretation of staff has been no more than 3 signs per storefront, because some buildings have multiple storefronts.
Right.
So for a new building like Harvest Square, for example, there's storefronts, and we've accommodated 3 signs per ground level tenant, essentially. But we're needing to explore ways to provide some assistance and direction to buildings where there's upper story tenancies where a ground level entrance. I don't think it's as much of a problem in situations like this where you have no door on the front for the upper level. But I did want to show you this because I felt like this kind of helped address or illustrate rather the way by which in Charleston, at least, they've tried to identify these upper floor areas.
I think it's nice to give the upper level a sign. I wouldn't call it a directory, because if first level's got the window space, they don't need to be on the second level sign.
And a directory sign, as defined by the zoning ordinance, is really a wall-type sign that lists multiple tenants. We do have some of those on Main Street, but unfortunately, a lot of our Main Street is a wall or a window wall, and so there's not a lot of place to put that. So sometimes if there is an alcove that's still outside, they'll have like a directory like right here before the door. But the complaints I'm hearing is that that's not enough to help people find what they're looking for, because it's not right there on the outside wall.
And those are mainly businesses.
Yes, they're like
not
offices.
Retail.
Right. Non-retail office uses.
I'm assuming in the sign ordinance that there is a clearance that has to be above the lowest part of the sign?
Yes, it's problematic for some folks to make, but the code requirement is that the bottom of a sign has to be at least 8 feet from the grade surface.
So if a landlord wanted to add more signs, he may have to work with his tenants to make the others smaller.
Yes, that has commonly happened for us. And what that does is it helps keep a sign from being large too. We do limit all of that to currently 4.5 square feet of cumulative sign face. It doesn't matter to me if it's one sign face like this one, or if it's multiple sign faces, as long as it's no more than that square footage amount. And this clearly doesn't meet the requirement that our community has for clearance, but this would probably need to sit higher up in order to do that.
Well, I'm trying to figure out on that building where there's 2 hanging signs.
There's one here, one here.
No, the other one.
Oh, I'm sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button.
Okay.
There's one hanging sign here, and then there's one over this
Yeah,
entrance here.
right.
Mhm.
But now you could only have 1 hanging sign?
Right now, we limit to 3 signs per building.
Well, would we allow 3 hanging signs per building?
No, right now, I try to encourage people to diversify their sign types.
Yeah.
So you have a wall sign, a projecting
Right.
arm, an awning, et cetera.
So I'm all for this unless we got into where there were 3 or 4 hanging signs on one building.
I understand that completely. We can certainly write the guideline as recommended to be, if you have 2 entrances on your ground level and one goes up, then you could have an extra sign there. Are you counting this as 2 signs or 4? I'm counting that as 2 signs.
Me too.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I mean, would you change the language to say that the number of signs would be per business, or?
We are exploring how to write that to be as clear as possible. Right now, if it's a normal storefront, meaning it's just one ground level entry, no entry to upstairs, it'd be 3 signs for that ground level tenancy.
But they couldn't all 3 be hanging.
But they couldn't all 3 be hanging.
Right.
Well, we will make clear in the guidelines document that it's no more than 1 projecting arm sign or small blade sign. I think we're changing the name of it to something like a hanging sign, something that's more understandable for the user. But multiple wall signs might be accommodated if that's the way the commission wants to go. Right now, the zoning ordinance says 1 wall sign per facade. And I think that we could accommodate more than 1 per the current ordinance, more than 1 of these hanging signs. We just want to be very strategic and clear on when that would be accommodated, because the whole intent of limiting the sign count for the historic district is to prevent excessive visual clutter. So we want to certainly be respectful of these situations where someone is looking for a business and they have a door here, but they just can't find it, or these people are boxed in because they've already used all the 3. When there's a lot more situations where folks are upstairs but their access is from the back, we do allow signs on the back in addition to those 3 because they are on the back and it's not attributing to the same visual clutter, quote unquote, that you would have on the front. So this would really be specific to entrances or storefronts where there's 2 entrances.
I don't know if this is something that's happened here, but I know, like in New Orleans, they've got street kiosks where clusters of retail, like as opposed to like in the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the street, like where trees are growing, they've got little kiosks where it would list, go this store this way, go that store that way. So it lists those on that block that, so it gets it off the wall because like you said, it's mostly glass front or keep a lot of the stuff off the wall anyway. New Orleans got a lot of shutters on the walls, but I don't know if that was something that has ever been thought of or if that is out there.
Well, we do have a couple of signs on Main Street currently that are maintained by the Downtown Franklin Association that have panels that say where to find certain merchants.
But it's freestanding.
But it's freestanding.
Okay.
And those haven't been updated in a while, but I do have a meeting with the Heritage Foundation actually this week to talk about, exploring how to move forward on updating those. So that's a way to kind of help in some of those things.
Just
It's
so
difficult, though,
declutter.
when there's storefront or store turnovers and, keeping
Right.
those signs up to date.
And then who maintains that? The other way, it's the tenant.
Mhm. No, I think in this case, what we might be going toward is something that, has a QR code or some sort of means to get people to an easily editable website. So people can, we don't have outdated panels. But to get back to this point, we certainly appreciate your comments here. I think it'll help address some of the more unusual circumstances we have, but have been arising pretty often this last year. So we'll take that into account in our update. And to recap what I've heard from you, you'd like to learn more about receiving the draft before the release date. I don't believe that's a possibility, but I would certainly explore that. And we'll schedule a meeting with all of you to discuss the update, and then I'll also work to schedule individual meetings with each of you as well, because I do think there's some merit to that. So, do you have any other questions or comments for us?
I like it.
Thank
I mean,
you.
I like what you've shown. The slides are so much more helpful.
I
and-
am so excited about the user-friendliness of this. I do think it's going to be leaps and bounds easier for an applicant to pick up and really understand the intent.
Yeah, it's not exhausting. It's almost inviting.
Thank you.
Stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.